to when you're talking about issues like Iran, though, if you're waking up in the morning and you're seeing that push notification that says we were going to bomb them and then we changed our minds, right, at the last minute, that can be really concerning. And I do want to hear Democrats be specific about what they are going to do that is different from President Trump. And not just President Trump's rhetoric, but his actual administration's policies, because those two things are different as well.
We have heard some specifics, though. For example, Joe Biden said that China was not direct competition. And then we saw Bernie Sanders say, wait a minute, untrue. It's absolutely our economic competition. Which of those messages do you think is going to win out or play best with voters tonight?
I mean, I think for the Democrats, if they focus on intellectual property, for an example, that's a big thing that I think you can sort of distinguish yourself from the president. You also look at China and look at what they're doing essentially in our own backyard throughout South America, giving out these zero free interest loans. Look at what they're doing in South Africa, the Middle East. There are very nuanced ways, and you know this better than I, to sort of make a clear distinction from what we've seen coming from the Trump administration. And as it relates to Iran, my message would simply be this: stability. Don't vote for Trump, vote for me, because I will bring stability, which I think we'll see tonight.
I think that's what they could say, but they're not. I mean, on China, this would be an easy one, for example, to say that China, because of the tariffs we're imposing that are hurting American companies and American consumers, the Chinese are going around and doing business with everyone else. We should have, from the beginning, allied with everyone else around the world and say, listen, let's work together to confront China. So the Democratic candidates could say that, but they're not saying it, and I just don't understand why.
Which was a little surprising to see how light everyone was on foreign policy. But do you think that when we bring it back home to domestic issues, that will change things? For example, we know that Robert Mueller just decided he was, in fact, going to testify. Do you think that will change the conversation around the Mueller report or even Russia's role in the 2016 election?
Yes, and it should change the conversation, because I'm surprised Russia didn't come up. Bill de Blasio was the only person who mentioned Russia. And we need to be talking about Russia. They are still in our social media feeds. There are still bot armies trying to infiltrate our conversations about this election. They're still doing the thing they were doing in 2016. So we need to be very vigilant in this moment. And President Trump doesn't believe they really did it, so he hasn't put forward any policy. So that's an opening, I think, that would tie together both domestic and foreign policy by saying, this is what I'm going to do to ensure that our election systems are protected.
I think Democrats need to be careful, though, with this impeachment notion, and I'll tell you why. Of the 61, 62 seats that they won in 2018, about 42, 43 of them were from Republican previously held districts that Donald Trump won. The Washington Post about a month ago did a great profile piece on some of those members, and what they said was most of the constituents in their districts are not talking about impeaching Trump. They don't even want to hear that, which is why I think Nancy Pelosi has been very, very careful, because she doesn't want to risk losing her majority. So I think it's great to say that for the base of the party, but they need to be very, very careful about some of those other areas that they won in 2018 that I would argue they need in 2020 if they plan to beat Donald Trump.
Well, I don't think that the push right now for the majority of Democrats, the Democratic Party, even the ones that are in Congress, is for impeachment. There are 80 or so Democrats on the record saying they're calling for impeachment. That number is going up, but that's less than half of the caucus, right? So that's not the main focus of the conversation. The loudest voices are talking about it. But I don't think that that's the ultimate goal. What I do think in the short term they're going to try to do is bring the Mueller report to life. Bring in those witnesses. Now that we have Robert Mueller coming in, who else can we bring in to actually pull the information that's on the pages that Americans have not read and internalized? How can we bring that to life and almost act it out for people so they understand what obstruction of justice was taking place in the White House?
But where does this
during
go,
the presidency?
I would agree with Zerlina.
Where does this go?
What do you mean, where does it go?
It's going to fail in the Senate. We know that automatically.
Yes,
Mitch McConnell's not going to agree to this.
I don't care about that.
So why are you doing it?
Because the American people need to be educated about what their president is doing while he is in the White House. A foreign government
is this the way to educate them?
Yes, that is Congress's role, to conduct oversight over the executive branch and inform the American people who need to know all of the information that is contained in the Mueller report so they can make educated votes in November 2020. So it may not be up to Mitch McConnell, it would be up to the American people to do the removing.
What would you do?
Republicans only need to flip 21 of those seats to take back the majority in the House. if this is the direction Democrats want to go, I would target every single one of those Democrats who flip those Republican seats and make sure we take 21 of them.
I'm not talking about
Pelosi loses her majority.
I'm not saying that Democrats are running on impeachment. What I'm saying is
they
are starting. No, I'm not.
But you are saying it's important.
It isn't. No. What I'm saying is understanding the content of the Mueller report is important. I'm not talking about, impeaching and removing the president as an automatic two-step. You just do it and it happens overnight. That's not how this country works. No president has ever been removed in that manner, right? So what we're talking about now is using the congressional oversight responsibility to educate the American public about the contents of the Mueller report, because we skip over it. We skip over it like there were not crimes enumerated in that report.
I agree. I agree with everything you're saying.
Maybe crimes.
I agree with you as far as the ethics, as far as the president doing things that I would even argue as a Republican. But what I'm saying is politically
if a Democrat had done the same thing,
wait, I want to hear sure,
Michael.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but as a strategist, I am telling you, if Democrats want to go in that direction, there's every single Republican at the RNC, at the House Republican Research Committee, that's going to focus on those members, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure Pelosi loses that majority. That's
Republicans wake up every day and do that. Republican strategists are doing it every day.
My view is more from the foreign policy angle, right? Which is how you started asking about how Robert Mueller, how does this
affect our conversation?
Right. How does it affect the conversation? I think that's critical because, to no one's surprise, I'm going to argue that I think foreign policy should be much more upfront. I think it's really important, but I do understand that for the voter, it's really about the economy, and healthcare is certainly the beginning. But that being said, foreign policy certainly now is really critical because it entered our elections in 2016, and it had a direct impact on the voter. Voters should care. They may not know they should care at the moment, and that's why educating them is so critical. On impeachment, this is a separate story. My view is that it's a distraction, but that's my own opinion.
But how do you make them?
But that's not even the point I'm making, right? I think what I'm
education
saying is that
key. It's critical.
I want there to be serious and formal hearings. That doesn't mean that it's an automatic.
And the candidates should be talking about
an inquiry.
But is that how are you killing two birds with one stone? Is that how you educate them? Is through this process? Is through the Mueller report? How do we make people?
There's no louder. I mean, the loudspeaker that the candidates have right now is much larger than any hearing, than any newspaper article. They have an opportunity right now, with all their followings, on social media, at all of their rallies, to say, this is why this is important. This is what Russia is doing.
This is
China could be doing the same thing. And this is what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to put, for example, more money and more resources in the U.S. government when I become president to combat that, to beef up cybersecurity, to ensure that Facebook and Twitter and Google, that they work with us to ensure that disinformation isn't rampant. I mean,
I think
there are things they could talk about.
There's a lot of people who just are unclear. They don't understand.
They don't understand.
But Morgan, Democrats had an opportunity to educate the American people over
How long did Watergate take?
Over again.
From the break-in to Nixon resigning.
Wait, why do you think they're
many
missing
years. It takes a long time.
Wait, last Ox, we have to go to break. Why do you think they're missing the mark?
A year and a half from now, that's how long it would take if you open up impeachment hearings.
That's what I'm saying.
Donald Trump would already be reelected, Morgan. So what objective? What's the objective here? What's the end goal?
We don't know what's going to happen before midnight, right? So I'm not sitting here and saying that I know exactly what's going to happen in 2020 based on this strategy. What I'm saying that as an American citizen who lives in a country that had elections attacked, and even my own personal email almost hacked, right? Because I was on the Clinton campaign by a foreign government. I think there needs to be some sort of accountability for that.
I agree.
And in the report, Robert Mueller investigated this and found crimes.
But the politics aren't on
ladies and gentlemen, tonight is all about accountability, and we could do this all night, and hopefully we will hear as much about foreign policy on the debate floor as we do on this couch. All right, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Well, here it is. This is the month to start looking at on your calendar. February 2020. That's when all the talk ends and the voting begins. And that massive, gigantic, enormous Democratic presidential field, it gets thinned down. And maybe by the end of that month, we'll even have a pretty good sense who the nominee is going to be. Iowa, always in that leadoff position. The Iowa caucuses, there it is, Monday, February 3rd. The race begins in Iowa, and then traditionally, it is an 8-day stretch from Iowa to New Hampshire. First caucuses in Iowa, first primary in New Hampshire 8 days later. So you can expect however many candidates are left when they get to the starting line in Iowa, there's probably going to be far fewer 8 days later between Iowa and New Hampshire. You can expect a lot of winnowing to take place. You'll have some clear candidates who are out in front as well. The next stop, this is a new one on the Democratic, a relatively new one. Only the last couple cycles, Nevada. Caucuses in Nevada. That's the next one. And then the big one, obviously, the South Carolina primary, the first in the South primary at the end of the month. And of course, South Carolina, very important because this is the first state where you're going to have a really substantial black population voting. 60%, more than 60% of the Democratic electorate in the 2016 South Carolina primary was African American. So a key test there. 4 individual contests. We'll talk only about these states the nights they come in. That's going to be February, but then flip the calendar. From the last day of February, look at this. Go into March, just a couple days later, Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday, let me give you a sense what that looks like. Massive. Enormous. You go from one contest at a time, all in the same. You got California, you got Texas, you got a bunch in the South, you got Massachusetts, Minnesota, all of these states all at once. So February is going to produce some clarity in terms of who's a contender. Super Tuesday, mega primary. That could give us some real answers potentially in early March.
Our very own Dasha Burns is with us tonight, watching the debate live from downtown New York with a few college students from all across the country. Dasha, what is on everyone's mind heading now into night 2?
Hey, Morgan, I've got a brilliant group of students here. They're from across the country. They're from across the political spectrum. We have Democrats, Republicans, independents. And for a couple of folks here, this is actually going to be their first time voting in a presidential election. So they're watching really closely. And guys, let's start with the front runner, Joe Biden. Okay, show of hands, who is super excited about Biden? Wow. Nobody. Okay. You want to talk to me about why? Why is he not lighting a fire in this room?
Personally, I feel like as it relates to Joe Biden, him running for president is really just something to check off a list. Like Monday I had spaghetti, Tuesday I was vice president, now Wednesday I want to be president. He's really, in my opinion, approaching this presidential campaign like it is a right for him, and it's going to be interesting to see other candidates kind of hold his feet to the fire, especially his controversial past as it relates to reforming the prison system that we have now.
I also feel like piggybacking off that, we're all going to be looking to see Biden kind of define his policies because he's flip-flopped so much in his long political career. I think that we're all kind of looking for him to come through with a solid message and a solid thing that we actually feel like he believes in genuinely himself and is not kind of just doing for the political gains of it.
Well, and I think that, we just heard, that Vice President Biden doesn't really view China as an economic threat. But when you go to a place like Pittsburgh and the tariffs and the steel, a U.S. steel plant just got a $1.3 billion investment there. And how is Joe Biden going to go to that part of America and say, I'm the better candidate for the working class? And how is he going to distinct himself from the president? I think that's going to be an important thing to watch for.
So it sounds like he's not really resonating both with policy and just generally with messaging. I mean, one of the reasons why some people who are excited about him is because of the long track record he has, the ton of experience that he has. Someone that's also a front runner on the stage that has probably the least government experience is Pete Buttigieg. Thinking about those two, I mean, there's about a 40-year age gap between the two of them, and that says a lot about experience and perspective. There are a lot of differences there. What's resonating more with you guys? I mean, when we were talking earlier, a lot of you were excited about Buttigieg. Why is that something that gets you going?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think specifically not only because he's young, but because he's bringing new ideas. The reason why I think, of course, Biden has a big trajectory, he's not bringing new and exciting, innovative ideas like we're hearing with Pete. And yes, he's young, but also he's going to bring new ideas, and that's what we want to see. We want to see tax reform. We want to see the reform of the prison system. And I feel like with Biden, the conversation has never been about reform, just, okay, keeping things kind of how they are and just tweaking them a little bit. And we don't want to see just a little bit of tweaking. This is going to be our future. future. So for us, it's really key to find candidates who are actually going to talk about innovation and how they can change things that are going to have an effect not only in 3 years, but in 2 years when they're already elected, and that we can see the ripple effects in the years following.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because we talk about the big age gap and perspective gap between Buttigieg and Biden, but Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are not that different in age, and yet you guys seem to view him pretty differently. Can you talk to me about Bernie Sanders and why he's resonating in a way that maybe Biden isn't with your generation?
Yeah, Bernie Sanders is high energy. He uses social media well. He reaches out to younger voter bases really well. He's just someone that I think no matter what age you are, you can kind of connect with him and see all the work he's done his whole life. He's someone who's he's pushed and he's pushed and he's pushed, and he's kind of at this point now where, yeah, he's old, but he certainly doesn't act old, even though he's been through so much.
I feel like with Bernie, we see a consistent passion and a really consistent message and a consistent point of view from where he's coming and his ideology. Even if you disagree with it, you can definitely respect the way that he's been so consistent for such a long time. Whereas versus somebody like Biden, I think that we see less of a genuine passion coming from him.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about this term democratic socialism, and how is that playing amongst you and your peers?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the term itself, democratic socialism, it has a very controversial term already in it, socialism. And I believe that's why a lot of people are even having a lot of problems as it relates to candidates like Bernie Sanders. It's going to be interesting to see how, as discussed before, he's going to try to push that more into a position where both Republicans and Democrats can kind of come together and agree on the issues that they want to reform, as well as other candidates such as Elizabeth Warren that's already kind of straight down the middle. That's going to be a lot easier for those that are moderates or independents to kind of join onto her own bandwagon.
I think it's important for us to also recognize that just because they're labeling themselves as democratic socialists, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're inherently against what capitalism is. Mm-hmm. They're taking the most egregious aspects of capitalism that result in massive inequality, in death, in a shrinking middle class, and they're taking that and saying, we can fix this, and we can fix this under capitalism with what could be socialist policies.
Right, so it's not necessarily a turnoff, but you want to see how they actually define that and how it plays tonight. Well, we'll be seeing how that term is thrown around and what these candidates are putting on the table. Morgan?
Dasha, thank you so much, and thank you to all of your student panelists. We hope that you stick around with us here. And for all of those of you watching out there, stay tuned because we have a lot more to dive into right before night 2 of the Democratic debate begins. Healthcare was one of the top issues in last night's debate, sparking some heated moments from nearly every single candidate on stage. But perhaps most notably, they fought over the role that private insurance should play in individual healthcare plans. Elizabeth Warren declared that she was with Bernie Sanders in supporting Medicare for all, and then tonight the senator from Vermont is going to be taking center stage with his policy platform. Michael, Alex, and Hagar are back with me now. And I want to talk a little bit about this sense of healthcare and where we are. We saw that Warren and de Blasio were against keeping the private option. O'Rourke and Klobuchar said they wanted to keep it. Do we think we're going to see a new option tonight? And where do you think the candidates on night 2 will fall, Jackie?
Well, I think this is actually going to be
I really do like
the
Kamala's little...
It really, I think, illustrate just how desperate Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are. You have Bernie on one side of the spectrum, right, who is anti-incrementalism, wants to implement Medicare for all, and wants to eliminate private insurance. Then you have Joe Biden, on the other hand, who wants to, Obamacare is one of his biggest legacies. He wants to build on Obamacare. He wants to give people the public option. And I think that really captures his incrementalist approach. And that here is, I think, what you're seeing, these kids that Dasha's been spending time with who are kind of against this sort of slow boil and are in favor of more dramatic policies that can affect change tomorrow.
Michael, you're chuckling. Why?
I am, because it's not realistic. I respect the kids, and I get it, but I've worked in politics for a while now. I've been in D.C. for a while now. That's just not how things work. I think one of the issues for someone like an AOC, she found out really fast with the Green New Deal just how D.C. works. You have to work in reality. You have to get other members, and sometimes even people in your own party, to work with you to pass some of these pieces of legislation. And some of them have to take place incrementally.
Ali Velshi and John Delaney had a great conversation today. I think they went back and forth on this topic. And some of the biggest, richest countries, most developed countries in the world have transitioned very easily overnight to a public option, eliminated private health insurance, and have consistent rates.
They transitioned, but was it successful? I mean,
right.
The citizens like it.
Canada, the NHS in England.
But they don't have the same political system or setup, I should say, that we do, particularly when you think about the partisanship that currently exists.
Hagar, why do you think it's not a realistic option?
I just really cannot wrap my mind around how it's funded. I really can't. And then when you ask, when candidates have been asked, I know Kamala Harris has been asked this, they kind of fumble over their words, right? They're just like, well, we'll just increase taxes on this, and we'll increase this, and the 1%, and then we'll increase the estate tax. I mean, none of that actually makes sense, and none of it to me seems very feasible for the reasons that Michael mentioned. That Washington just doesn't work like that, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think it sounds attractive to a young voter, and it sounds revolutionary almost.
But you don't think where the rubber meets the road, they can actually...
And our country's huge. I just don't see how it could work even.
In the span of 4 years that we've seen this conversation dramatically change. This really wasn't a topic of conversation in the Democratic Party until Bernie Sanders hit the big stage. And now you see AOC doing the exact same thing. In less than a year, she has revolutionized the conversation around climate change.
And everything she's attempted to do has failed. That's a fact. Every single thing she has proposed. Well, that's true, Morgan, but what I'm saying is the reality is when you look at the process of how you get these things done, how do you accomplish this? It's very, very difficult. And to just have these sweeping notions that I'm just going to get elected on day one and everything's going to change, it's not real.
But I think that's why this primary is so fascinating, right? Because there is this schism here between, and I think it's a really big generational gap.
I was just going to say,
between people who want who are ideological, want structural change, who think that Trump isn't an aberration, that Trump is actually an outgrowth of a lot of these systemic inequalities, and are gravitating towards candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren versus the Joe Bidens, who think that, Trump is a one-off, and that once he gets into office, we can just sweep it under the rug and it's business as usual.
But what about the competition between the candidates? I mean, earlier on, we heard Senator Warren say, I support Bernie Sanders' plan. I believe in everyone having this. Do you think she's trying to kind of creep into his base and pull some of those voters for herself?
I mean, looking at the numbers, she's already doing it, right?
Right.
I mean, I saw Nina Turner on earlier today, and she was making the case for Bernie Sanders, and she was essentially saying he's the original. We're not really worried about Elizabeth Warren because Bernie is the original. Well, the reality is Elizabeth Warren has been able to add a lot of substance to what Bernie Sanders originally brought to the conversation back in 2016.
I think the candidates need to be very careful in not over-promising and saying things that they assume the voter wants to hear. Or maybe they know the voter wants to hear it, but you can't go around making false promises. Then you're just going to end up being the Trump of the left.
But I think that's where Elizabeth Warren has a leg up, because all of her programs and policies put together, they're pretty balanced.
Right.
The Washington Post had a great piece by Jeff Stein that showed that it all evens out to zero, the way that all of her policies and her taxes offset each other.
I saw that.
And that's something that Bernie hasn't been able to articulate.
But just before we go, I mean, staying on the topic of healthcare, what about women's rights? Because we heard this round of applause yesterday when Julian Castro was talking about reproductive justice. When it comes to the topic of abortion, which of course has been debated heavily of late, is there a middle ground on this issue? Is there something that these candidates can say to perhaps get those swing state, middle of the road voters?
The middle of the road? I mean, I thought Elizabeth Warren, this is not middle of the road, actually. I'm just saying that I thought she did a great job in setting herself apart by saying that the courts had adjudicated on it and that it was time for legislation to prevent states from going right up until the courts or even really pushing that limit, right? So I thought that was smart, and it was putting something new forward. But where to get the middle of the ground? I mean, that's practical, actually. I think having something legal where there's less interpretation and room for states makes it more practical, perhaps. But
is there a middle ground, though, in this issue?
I don't think there is. I think you're either on the left of this or you're on the right. I don't think you're going to find, even among voters, folks who find themselves sort of centrist on the idea of abortion, pro-women rights or against it.
Right. Well, let's hear what these students have to say, because I'm curious what the college students have to say about their own health care plans. Let's get your opinion, Dasha. I know, Dasha, you have your panel of students there tonight. And I wanted to ask something that I heard them say in the last segment. It seems like everything the students talked about came down to authenticity. Just in a quick lightning round, which candidate does each student believe is most authentic?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, guys? Who's made the best authentic pitch to you?
Pete Buttigieg.
Pete Buttigieg.
Bernie Sanders.
Pete Buttigieg.
I think Bernie Sanders is the most authentic.
Bernie Sanders.
Interesting. So, thinking about last night, I mean, last night you basically all of you said Castro sort of stole the spotlight. What do you want to see tonight that you didn't see last night? Who do you want to see shine? What topics do you think didn't get enough cover?
Well, definitely, I feel like the candidates last night barely touched on the issue of reproductive rights, and we heard a lot about healthcare, which I think is extremely important to all of us here. But especially women, we want to hear about, especially with the laws that have been passed recently, very harshly limiting women's right to choose. I think that we're all very interested in just protecting or going against the right to choose, and what does it really mean to be maybe anti-abortion but pro-choice.
Right, well, and that's an interesting point, because this is a historic number of women that we have in this election and on that debate stage. How do you think that might change the conversation around reproductive rights tonight?
I think it's opening up, again, a unique conversation as to the rights that women might be able to have over their bodies versus how one identifies with their religious beliefs and how one might be able to come to a middle ground as it relates to that. It's also opening up another unique conversation as to the role that men play within this conversation. Even though this is an issue that directly affects women, we all know that women are not the only people that are voting on these laws. So it then also brings in the conversation as to the power that men are going to play when it comes to the conversation of women's reproductive rights. And that's going to be interesting to see in the future.
One thing I'd also love to talk about, and I don't think we've talked about it enough, we've discussed sort of the appeal of Buttigieg with being young and innovative and this sort of blow it all up, let's think of something new approach. What about bipartisanship? Do you want to hear any sort of appeal to that tonight? Do you want to hear candidates talk about the rhetoric and the divisiveness and maybe try to reach across the aisle a little bit, or is that not the time for it right now?
I mean, I think it absolutely is the time. I mean, you know, West Virginia, where I come from, used to be a reliably Democratic state. But, policies now have moved us, and we went 68% for Trump in 2016. I think it's going to be important for these candidates to articulate how are they going to reach that part of America? How are they going to get in touch with the values of that part of America? Because there is a huge regional divide in this country between those who live on the coast and those who live in the heartland. And I think it's going to be interesting to hear how they're going to talk about bridging that gap and coming together. And that's where I think somewhere like Mayor Buttigieg comes in, is, he sort of took South Bend, Indiana. That was a dying city when he came to it, and he's got it on the uptick again. And is he going to be able to bring that about the entire Midwest?
No, it's very different doing that when you're dealing with potentially a divided Congress and all of the bureaucracies of government.
Right. No, and that's why I think bipartisanship is going to be so important, because we want to make sure that the candidate that is chosen, that they're actually able to pass legislation working with people on both sides of the aisle. Like, you can be very retro in your new ideas and innovation, but if you can't work with the other side of the aisle, you're not going to make bills that are going to affect all of Americans, not just the side of Americans. So I think bipartisanship is also going to be very important, and to how they define themselves tonight.
Do you think they've talked about that enough on the campaign trail so far?
It's actually interesting, especially considering what you just said, because I know that a lot of liberals have a perspective that, as well as conservatives, that there are issues, let's take abortion, for example, where, it's just impossible to reach a middle ground. Some issues that people feel that there's nothing to come together on. You either are or you aren't. As we talk about, again, for example, Bernie Sanders and the topic, for example, about democratic socialism, how is he going to be able to reach out to those that are a bit more conservative or a bit more independent? There is also more conversation about how the Democratic Party is becoming more, quote unquote, radical as well. So with that conversation, there are a lot of topics that people feel that, no, there is no reason to meet you in the middle. I want my way, or, I don't want to hear it at all.
In that regard, I'm actually really excited about people like Pete Buttigieg, because they kind of serve as this bridge between the Democratic Socialists and the kind of more established Democratic Party. And he's talked quite a bit about how he has people in his constituency who sharply disagree with him, but he's able to negotiate with them. And he's able to serve in their interests. And I think that's a really appealing thing to see in candidates like him.
So that is an important thing to you guys. You don't want just the appeal to the left and far left. You want to see people kind of change the discourse and open up a little bit.
Absolutely. As somebody who's like a little bit more towards the center especially, I feel like there are a lot of people out there who are looking just for an alternative to Donald Trump. A lot of people feel that the left has gone so far left that they don't perhaps want to dip their toe into socialism. They don't want to kind of mingle with limitless abortion, but they also aren't in support of the rhetoric that the president has put across throughout his term. So I feel like a lot of people are definitely looking for a happy medium between the two of those, myself included.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I keep hearing from younger demographics that they're tired of the fistfights and they just want some people who can get things done, whether, especially in a bipartisan way. So we'll see what the candidates have to say tonight.
All right, Dasha, thank you, and thank you so much to your panelists. It's a great pleasure listening from them. Let's bring back in our guests here in the studio. We have Shermak, we have Jackie, and Zerlina. Jackie, who do you think stands the most to lose tonight?
Joe Biden, 100%, especially as his team has done everything to keep him from the media. He's not even, they've already announced that he's not doing the spin room tonight. He didn't visit the Homestead detention child care facility that's just 20 miles away. I know that his team has been prepping for weeks. It's why he hasn't been making the rounds at other media stops. He also has a lot that I think he needs to explain potentially and maybe express regret for. And I think those contrasts are really going to stand out when you're standing next to someone like Pete Buttigieg, who,
well, he's also been in hot water too this week, though, on some similar issues.
It's funny.
So is there a contrast there? I'm not quite sure. Shermak, I heard a deep sigh coming.
No, I agree with everything she
said. I think on foreign policy, there's a contrast with Pete and Joe Biden on issues of race. I think that's going to be something that you're going to see a contrast between him and Kamala Harris. Everyone stands to, I think, be attacking Biden. He is the front runner here, and he is the person that everyone's going to be gunning for.
No, I agree. and I think after this, Joe Biden, if I was at Vice President Biden, I would write a speech, and I would go over his record and his history, and I would address every single thing that's problematic today. I've made mistakes. I'm a different person. Things were different then, but this is who I am today. I recognize how the party has changed, and I am willing to meet the party and its voters where they are to get it out of the way, get it away from him so that he can move on.
Well, speaking of those voting records, though, one person we have not talked about is Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Zerlina, what do you think? I mean, we saw when she grilled Kavanaugh, when she grilled A.G. Barr. How is she going to handle being in the hot seat tonight?
Look, I think that Kamala has the challenge of high expectations. And so she is, according to the new AP poll, the #1 candidate that people want to learn more about. Right? So people are very interested in learning more about who she is, her background. They know she was a prosecutor. They likely think that she had a strong opening rollout to her campaign. It was very smooth. She had 20,000 people in Oakland. It is not easy to build an event with that many people to open your campaign. So I think that she has she has the challenge of both introducing herself to the American public for folks who haven't seen her, and also, putting that substance out there to go toe-to-toe with an Elizabeth Warren. But I think that, she's somebody that you have to see for yourself in order to really judge. You can't go based on what other people say. I hadn't met her until very recently, and it's really different when you're actually in the room or when
What was different?
Because everyone's smaller when you meet them.
You're talking about stature?
Yes. Everyone's smaller. Because you're normally seeing politicians on television. So when you meet them, they're always smaller, especially the women. But in addition to that, she has presence.
Yeah, you can see
so while she's small in stature, she has presence. She's very confident. I'm waiting for her to say something like, "I fully intend on winning this election." That's one of the lines that she gets, that sort of sparkler in her eye when she says it, with conviction. She's not in the race just to raise her profile. She's here to win.
Which is interesting, because I think she's someone who could actually stand to gain tonight.
Yeah,
someone who people are watching.
I expect her to do very, very well. I mean, to the points that Zerlina made, every single time we've seen her in a setting where she's debating someone or she's questioning someone, she stands out the most. And I think what's interesting about Kamala is when you think about black women. Black women seeing Kamala Harris as someone who empowers them. That's very, very important. And we cannot underestimate that. Absolutely.
Right.
I wouldn't underestimate it.
And just finally, one thing that we've heard a lot from voters, but that we didn't touch on tonight, was the economy. I mean, something we heard from the other candidates last night was their intention to show how an economic plan under a Democratic president could beat that of Trump's. How could the candidates tonight do that?
Well, that's where I think Biden, again, has some explaining to do. He did make those remarks that were obviously widely criticized and picked up about working with segregationist Democrats. But during those same remarks, he also said that nothing would change for this group of wealthy donors, that things would be exactly the same. And a lot of people took that to interpret that they wouldn't be paying more money, they wouldn't be subject to a wealth tax that a lot of the other candidates are pushing for. And that's where I think someone like Bernie Sanders has the opportunity to shine, at least in a certain age group, potentially, because, again, he does have this multifaceted approach to building the economy with his student debt plan, with his wealth tax. And I think that he is unparalleled on the stage in terms of offering that spectrum of policies.
With less than 1 minute to go until these candidates, they are already on the stage, but when they begin, strategically, do you think it's going to be more important for the candidates to address perhaps some of their shortcomings or the evolution of their ideas, or do you think it's going to be more important for them to begin with a brand new plan for America?
I think they need to show how they're better than Donald Trump and how they can defeat him. Simple.
So tonight is about Trump. All right, guys, thank you so much. And this is the moment we've been waiting for. We are about to see the candidates take the stage. Stay right here because we are headed straight to Miami.
Good evening, I'm Lester Holt, and welcome to night 2 of the first Democratic debate in the 2020 race for president.
Good evening, I'm Savannah Guthrie. Last night we heard from 10 candidates, and now 10 more take the stage.
And again tonight we'll be joined in the questioning by our colleagues, Jose Diaz-Balart, Chuck Todd, and Rachel Maddow.
The candidates are in position, so let's get started.
Tonight, round 2, Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, former Vice President Joe Biden, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, California Senator Kamala Harris, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, California Congressman Eric Swalwell, author Marianne Williamson, and former tech executive Andrew Yang. From NBC News, Decision 2020, the Democratic Candidates Debate. Live from the Adrienne Arsht Performing Arts Center in Miami, Florida.
Spirited audience here tonight in the Arts Center and across America tonight. We continue this spirited debate about the future of the country, how to tackle our most pressing problems, and getting to the heart of the biggest issues in this Democratic primary.
Tonight, we're going to talk about health care, immigration. We're also going to dive into the economy, jobs, climate change as well.
And some quick rules of the road before we begin, and they may sound familiar. 20 candidates qualified for this first debate. As we said, we heard from 10 last night, and we'll hear from 10 more tonight. The breakdown for each night was selected at random. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer, 30 seconds for any follow-ups.
And because of the large field of candidates, not every person is going to be able to weigh in on every topic. But over the course of the next 2 hours, we will hear from everyone.
And we love our audience, but we'd like to ask them to keep their reactions to a minimum, and we're not going to hold back in making sure the candidates stick to time. So with that business taken care of, let's get to it. And we're going to start today with Senator Sanders. Good evening to you. You've called for big new government benefits like universal health care and free college. In a recent interview, you said you suspected that Americans would be, quote, delighted to pay more taxes for things like that. My question to you is, will taxes go up for the middle class in a Sanders administration? And if so, how do you sell that to voters?
Well, you're quite right. We have a new vision for America. And at a time when we have 3 people in this country owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, while 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets today, we think it is time for change, real change. And by that I mean that health care, in my view, is a human right. And we have got to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system. Under that system, by the way, vast majority of the people in this country will be paying significantly less for health care than they are right now. I believe that education is the future for this country. And that is why I believe that we must make public colleges and universities tuition-free and eliminate student debt. And we do that by placing a tax on Wall Street. Every proposal that I have brought forth is fully paid for.
Senator Sanders, I'll give you 10 seconds just to answer the very direct question. Will you raise taxes for the middle class in a Sanders administration?
People who have health care under Medicare for all will have no premiums, no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bennett, we're going to get to everybody, I promise, but let me just, Senator Biden, promise everybody's going to get in here, promise. Vice President Biden, Senator Sanders, as you know, has been calling for a revolution. Recently, in remarks to a group of wealthy donors, as you were speaking about the problem of income inequality in this country, you said, we shouldn't, quote, demonize the rich. You said, nobody has to be punished. No one's standard of living would change. Nothing would fundamentally change. What did you mean by that?
What I meant by that is, look, Donald Trump thinks Wall Street built America. Ordinary middle-class Americans build America. My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joe, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's being able to look your kid in the eye and say everything's going to be okay. Too many people who are in the middle class and poor have had the bottom fall out under this proposal. What I'm saying is that we've got to be straightforward. We have to make sure we understand that to return dignity to the middle class, they have to have insurance that is covered and they can afford it. They have to make sure that we're in a situation where there's continuing education and they're able to pay for it. And they have to make sure that they're able to breathe air that is clean and they have water that they can drink. Look, Donald Trump has put us in a horrible situation. We do have enormous income inequality. And the one thing I agree on is we can make massive cuts in the $1.6 trillion in tax loopholes out there, and I would be going about eliminating Donald Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy.
Vice President Biden, thank you. Senator Harris. There's a lot of talk in this primary about new government benefits, such as student loan cancellation, free college, health care, and more. Do you think that Democrats have a responsibility to explain how they will pay for every proposal they make along those lines?
Well, let me tell you something. I hear that question, but where was that question when the Republicans and Donald Trump passed a tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations in this country, contributing at least $1 trillion to the debt of America, which middle-class families will pay for one way or another. Working families need support and need to be lifted up. And frankly,
you guys hear me?
This economy is not working for
comment down
working
below.
people. For too long, the
And
rules
I
have been
forgot to
written
pull
in
up
the
my
favor
tier
of the
list.
people who have the most and not in favor of the people who work the most, which is why I am proposing that we change the tax code. So for every family that is making less than $100,000 a year, they will receive a tax credit that they can collect up to $500 a month, which will make all the difference between those families being able to get through the end of the month with dignity and with support or not. And on day one, I will repeal that tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America.
Senator Harris, thank you. Governor Hickenlooper, let me get you in on this. You've warned that Democrats will lose in 2020 if they embrace socialism, as you put it. You were booed at the California Democratic Convention when you said that. Only one candidate on this stage,
Can you hear me?
Senator Sanders, identifies himself as a democratic socialist. What are the policies or positions of your opponents that you think are veering towards socialism?
Well, I think that the bottom line is if we don't clearly define that we are not socialists, the Republicans are going to come at us every way they can and call us socialists. And if you look at the Green New Deal, which I admire the sense of urgency and how important it is to do climate change, I'm a scientist, but we can't promise every American a government job. If you want to get universal health care coverage, I believe that health care is a right and not a privilege. But you can't expect to eliminate private insurance for 180 million people, many of whom don't want to give it up. In Colorado, we brought businesses and nonprofits together. We got to near universal health care coverage. We were the first state in America to bring the environmental community and the oil and gas industry to aggressively address methane emissions. And we were also the first place to expand reproductive rights on a scale basis, and we reduced teen pregnancy by 54%. We've done the big progressive things that people said couldn't be done. I've done what pretty much everyone else up here is still talking about doing.
Governor, thank you. Senator Sanders, I'll give you a chance to weigh in here. What is your response to those who say nominating a socialist would re-elect Donald Trump?
Hickenlooper at a
Well,
B
I think
currently.
the responses at the polls, last poll I saw had us 10 points ahead of Donald Trump, because the American people understand that Trump is a phony, that Trump is a pathological liar and a racist, and that he lied to the American people during his campaign. He said he was going to stand up for working families. Well, President Trump, you're not standing up for working families when you try to throw 32 million people off the health care that they have, and that 83% of your tax benefits go to the top 1%. That's how we beat Trump. We expose him for the fraud that he is.
B.
There's a big difference between capitalism on the one hand and greed on the other. And so all the things that we're trying to change is when companies care more about profits when they do about people. So if you're talking about ending gun violence, it's the greed of the NRA and the gun manufacturers that make any progress impossible. It's the greed of the insurance companies and the drug companies when we want to try to get health care as a right and not a privilege. So there need not be disagreement in the party because, in truth, we want healthy capitalism.
Thank you.
We don't want corrupted capitalism.
Thank you. I want to be fair to all the
definition
candidates.
of greed.
Thank you. Senator Bennett, you have said, quote, it's possible to write policy proposals that have no basis in reality. You might as well call them candy. Were you referring to any candidate or proposal in particular when you said that?
Was that directed to me?
Yes, that was your quote.
That sounded like me.
It was you.
I appreciate it.
Put Kristen Gillibrand at a D, a little on the boring side.
We're facing as a country is 40 years of no economic growth for 90% of the American people. 160,000 families in the top 0.1% have the same wealth as the bottom 90%, and we've got the worst income inequality that we've had in 100 years. Where I disagree is on his solution on Medicare for all. You know, I have proposed getting to universal health care, which we need to do. It is a right. Health care is a right. We need to get to universal health care. I believe the way to do that is by finishing the work we started with Obamacare and creating a public option that every family and every person in America can make a choice for their family about whether they want a public option, which for them would be like having Medicare for all, or whether they want to keep their private insurance. I believe we will get there much more quickly if we do that.
But wait,
Bernie, if I could just finish, Bernie mentioned that the taxes that we would have to pay, because of those taxes, Vermont rejected Medicare for all.
Senator,
and we should
we are going to talk about health care at length. Senator Bennett, for the moment, my colleagues say.
For now.
I wrote the part in Senator Sanders' bill. I wrote the part in Senator Sanders' bill that is the transition, which merges what the two senators said. Because the truth is, if you have a buy-in over a 4 or 5 year period, you move us to single payer more quickly.
Senator, we will get to this. We will get to this. Before we do, I want to say hello and good evening, buenas noches to Mayor Buttigieg.
Buenas noches, gracias de invitarnos.
Gusto en verlo, caballero. Many of your colleagues on stage support free college. You do not. Why not?
Sure. So college affordability is personal for us. Chasten and I have 6-figure student debt. I believe in reducing student debt. It's logical to me that if you can refinance your house, you ought to be able to refinance your student debt. I also believe in free college for low and middle income students for whom cost could be a barrier. I just don't believe it makes sense to ask working class families to subsidize even the children of billionaires. I think the children of the wealthiest Americans can pay at least a little bit of tuition. And while I want tuition costs to go down, I don't think we can buy down every last penny for them. Now, there's something else that doesn't get talked about in the college affordability debate. Yes, it needs to be more affordable in this country to go to college. It also needs to be more affordable in this country to not go to college. You should be able to live well, afford rent, be generous to your church and Little League, whether you went to college or not. That's one of many reasons we need to raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour.
Something pretty smart for Buttigieg to say to people who believe in free college. So I'm going to B.
This problem was created to be the ones to solve it. It's going to be the next generation, the 40 million of us who can't start a family, can't take a good idea and start a business, and can't buy our first home. This is the generation that's going to be able to solve student loan debt. This generation is ready to lead.
Mr. Yang, your signature policy is to give every adult in the United States $1,000 a month, no questions asked.
That's right.
I think that's like $3.2 trillion a year. How would you do that?
Sorry?
How would you do that?
Oh, so it's difficult to do if you have companies like Amazon, trillion-dollar tech companies paying literally zero in taxes while they're closing 30% of our stores. Now, we need to put the American people in position to benefit from all these innovations in other parts of the economy. And if we had a value-added tax at even half the European level, it would generate over $800 billion in new revenue, which combined with the money in our hands, it would be the trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. We would spend the money and it would circulate through our regional economies and neighborhoods, creating millions of jobs, making our families stronger and healthier. We'd save money on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care, and just the value gains from from having a stronger, healthier, mentally healthier population, would increase GDP by $700 billion. This is the move that we have to make, particularly as technology is now automating away millions of American jobs. It's why Donald Trump is our president today, that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we're about to do the same thing to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, and on through the economy.
Mr. Aaron, if I get you understand a little bit better, so you're saying $1,000 a month for everyone over 18, but a value-added tax, so you can spend that $1,000 on value-added tax?
Well, the value-added tax would end up,
Yang is a little
you'd still be increasing the buying power of the
iffy
bottom
right now.
94% of Americans. You have to spend a lot of money for a mild value-added tax to eat up $12,000 a year per individual. So
I'm going to put him at AD currently a little on the shaky side on his point, and a lot of people seem to be attracted to that.
Things like self-driving cars, robots, drones, artificial intelligence will cost them their jobs. What would you do to help people get the skills they need to adapt to this new world?
We must always be a country where technology creates more jobs than it displaces. And I've seen the anxiety across America where the manufacturing floors go from 1,000 to 100 to 1. So we have to modernize our schools, value the teachers who prepare our kids, wipe the student debt from any teacher that goes into a community that needs it, invest in America's communities, especially where places where the best exports are people who move away to get skills. But Jose, I was 6 years old when a presidential candidate came to the California Democratic Convention and said, it's time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans. That candidate was then Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden was right when he said it was time to pass the torch to a new generation of Americans 32 years ago. He's still right today. If we're going to solve the issues of automation, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issues of climate chaos, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issue of student loan debt, pass the torch.
Definitely helped and hurt
for families who are fearful of sending their kids to school, pass the torch.
Vice President, would you like
to
sing a song?
I'm still holding on to that torch. I want to make it clear to you, look, the fact of the matter is what we have to do is make sure that everybody is prepared better to go on to educate for an education. The fact is that's why I propose us focusing on schools that are in distress. That's why I think we should triple the amount of money we spend for Title I schools. That's why I think we should have universal pre-K. That's why I think every single person who graduates from high school,
I gotta
65 out of 100
go get
now
something.
need something beyond high school, and we should provide for them to be able to get that education. That's why there should be free community college, cutting in half the cost of college. That's why we should be in a position where we do not have anyone have to pay back a student debt when they get out. They're making less than $25,000 a year. Their debt is frozen, no interest payment until they get beyond that. We can't put people in a position where they aren't able to go on and move on. And so, folks, there's a lot we can do, but we have to make continuing education available for everyone so that everyone can compete in the 21st century. We're not doing that now.
Senator Sanders.
As the youngest guy on the stage, I feel like I probably ought to contribute to the generation conversation.
As part of Joe's generation,
I'm all for
part of Joe's generation, let me respond.
Before we move
the
on
issue,
from,
if I may say, is not generational.
Let's please.
The
Senator
issue
Sanders,
is not generational. The issue is who has the guts to take on Wall Street, to take on the fossil fuel industry, to take on the big money interests who have unbelievable influence over the economic and political life of this country.
These issues
Senator Harris, I'm so sorry. We will let all of you speak. Senator Harris. Senator Harris. Please, we will let you all speak. Senator Harris.
We can't afford to wait for evolution on these issues.
Hey guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They
All
want
right,
to know how
I'm
we're gonna
back.
put food on their table.
Kamala Harris, I'm gonna boost. Oh, I don't have it on there yet.
Part of the issue that is at play in America today, and we've all been traveling around the country, I certainly have, I'm meeting people who are working 2 and 3 jobs. You know, this president walks around talking about and flouting his great economy, right? My great economy, my great economy. You ask him, well, how are you measuring this greatness of this economy of yours? And he talks about the stock market. Well, that's fine if you own stocks. So many families in America do not. You ask them, how are you measuring the greatness of this economy of yours? And they point to the jobless numbers and the unemployment numbers. Well, yeah, people in America are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. So when we talk about jobs, let's be really clear. In our America, no one should have to work more than 1 job to have a roof over their head and food on the table.
Thank you very much, Senator.
We've all expressed an interest in talking about health care, so let's talk about health care. And this is going to be a
Sorry
show of hands
about that.
question.
My
We asked a
Wi-Fi is
question
being
about
weird
health
right
care
now.
last night that spurred a lot of discussion, as you know. We're going to do it again now. Many people watching at home have health insurance of their employer. Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan? All right. Kristen Gillibrand, Senator Gillibrand.
Yeah, so no, it's my turn.
Go ahead.
So this is a very important issue. So the plan that Senator Sanders and I and others support, Medicare for All, is how you get to single payer. But it has a buy-in transition period, which is really important. In 2005, when I ran for Congress in a 2-to-1 Republican district, I actually ran on Medicare for All, and I won that 2-to-1 Republican district twice. And the way I formulated it was simple. Anyone who doesn't have access to insurance they like, they could buy in at a percentage of income they could afford. So that's what we put into the transition period for our Medicare for All plan. I believe we need to get to universal health care as a right and not a privilege to single payer. The quickest way you get there is you create competition with the insurers. God bless the insurers. If they want to compete, they can certainly try. But they've never put people over their profits, and I doubt they ever will. So what will happen is people will choose Medicare, you will transition, we will get to Medicare for All, and then your step to single payer is so short. I would make it an earned benefit, just like Social Security, so that you buy in your whole life, it is always there for you, and it's permanent and it's universal.
Senator, your time is up. I want to put that same question to Mayor Buttigieg.
Yeah, we've taught, look, everybody who says Medicare for All, every person in politics who allows that phrase to escape their lips, has a responsibility to explain how you're
thank you for hitting 100 subs. Wow.
Now here's how I would do it.
Tomorrow I'll have a poll up and see what we do.
Like Medicare, a flavor of that, you make it available on the exchanges, people can buy in, and then if people like us are right, that will be not only a more inclusive plan, but a more efficient plan than any of the corporate answers out there, then it will be a very natural glide path to the single-payer environment. But let's remember, even in countries that have outright socialized medicine, like England, even there's still a private sector. That's fine. It's just that for our primary care, we can't be relying on the tender mercies of the corporate system. This one's very personal for me. I started out this year dealing with the terminal illness of my father. I make decisions for a living. And nothing could have prepared me for the kind of decisions our family faced. But the thing we had going for us was that we never had to make those decisions based on whether it was going to bankrupt our family because of Medicare. And I want every family to have that same freedom to do what is medically right, not live in financial fear.
Your time is complete. Vice President Biden, I want to put the question to you. You were one of the architects of Obamacare. So where do we go from here?
Look, this is very personal to me. When my wife and daughter were killed in an automobile accident, my 2 boys were really very badly injured. I couldn't imagine what it'd be like had I not had adequate health care available immediately. And then when my son came home from Iraq after a year, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he was given months to live. I can't fathom what would have happened if, in fact, they said, by the way, the last 6 months of your life, you're on your own. We're cutting off. You've used up your time. The fact of the matter is that the quickest, fastest way to do it is build on Obamacare, to build on what we did. And secondly, to make sure that everyone does have an option. Everyone, whether they have private insurance, employer insurance, or no insurance, they, in fact, could buy in the exchange to a Medicare-like plan. And the way to do that, we can do it quickly. Look, urgency matters. There's people right now facing what I faced and what we faced without any of the help I had. We must move now. I'm against any Democrat who opposes, takes down Obamacare, and any Republican who wants to get rid of Obamacare.
Let me turn to Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders,
Biden,
you basically want to scrap the private health insurance system as we know it and replace it with a government-run plan. None of the states that have tried something like that, California, Vermont, New York has struggled with it, have been successful. If politicians can't make it work in those states, how would you implement it on a national level? How does this work?
Listen, I find it hard to believe that every other major country on earth, including my neighbor 50 miles north of me, Canada, somehow has figured out a way to provide health care to every man, woman, and child, and in most cases, they're spending 50% per capita what we are spending. Let's be clear. Let us be very clear. The function of health care today, from the insurance and drug company perspective, is not to provide quality care to all in a cost-effective way. The function of the healthcare system today is to make billions in profits for the insurance companies. And last year, if you could believe it, while we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, and I will lower prescription drug prices in half in this country, top 10 companies made $69 billion in profit. They will spend hundreds of millions of dollars lying to the American people, telling us why we cannot have a Medicare for all single-payer program.
I just have to follow up there. How do you implement it on a national level? How do you implement it on a national level, given the fact it's not succeeded in other states that have tried?
I will tell you how we'll do it. We'll do it the way real change has always taken place, whether it was the labor movement, the civil rights movement, or the women's movement. We will have Medicare for all when tens of millions of people are prepared to stand up and tell the insurance companies and the drug companies that their day is gone, that health care is a human right, not something to make huge profits off of.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Williamson.
No, I am not Rick Moose.
Excuse me, I'm addressing the question, Ms. Williamson. We've been talking a lot about access to health insurance, but for many Americans, their most pressing concern is the high cost of health care. How would you lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Well, first of all, the government should never have made the deal with the big pharma that they couldn't negotiate. That was just part of the regular corruption by which multinational corporations have their way with us. You know, I want to say that while I agree with, I'm with Senator Bennett and others, but I agree with almost everything here. I'll tell you one thing. It's
She's
really
talking
nice that we
too
got all these
fast.
plans, but if you think we're going to beat Donald Trump by just having all these plans, you got another thing coming. Because he didn't win by saying he had a plan. He won by simply saying, make America great again. We've got to get deeper than just these superficial fixes, as important as they are. Even if we're just talking about the superficial fixes, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a health care system in the United States. We have a sickness care system in the United States. We just wait till somebody gets sick, and then we talk about who's going to pay for the treatment and how they're going to be treated. What we need to talk about is why so many Americans have unnecessary chronic illnesses, so many more compared to other countries. And that gets back into not just the big pharma, not just health insurance companies. It has to do with chemical policies. It has to do with environmental policies. It has to do with food policies. It has to do with drug policies.
I'll put her probably at a B.
You want to keep the system that we have in place with Obamacare and build on it. You mentioned that a moment ago. Is that enough to get us to universal coverage?
I believe that will get us the quickest way there. And I thought the Vice President was very moving about this, and Mayor Pete as well. I had prostate cancer recently, as you may know, and that's why I was a little late getting in the race. The same week my kid had her appendectomy out. And I feel very strongly that families ought to be able to have this choice. I think that's what the American people want. I believe it will get us there quickly.
I am not going to answer that question, but I have enough knowledge to know what's going on in politics. That's what I'm going to say.
They can't afford health insurance. When Senator Sanders
oh shoot, I just gained 4 subscribers. Or 3 subscribers.
There are 35 million people in Canada. There are 330 million people in the United States, easily the number of people on a public option. It could easily be 35 million. And for them, it would be Medicare for all, as Mayor Buttigieg says. But for others that want to keep it, they should be able to keep it. And I think that will be the fastest way to get where we need to go. Also, I will say, Bernie is a very honest person. He has said over and over again, unlike others that have supported this legislation, over and over again, that this will ban, make illegal, all insurance except cosmetic, except insurance for, I guess that's for plastic surgery. Everything else is banned under the Medicare for All proposal that he has put forward. I'd like to go a little longer there, but obviously Senator Sanders,
I'm about that around that age.
Just very briefly. You know, Mike, Medicare is the most popular health insurance program in the country. People don't like their private insurance companies. They like their doctors and hospitals. Under our plan, people go to any doctor they want, any hospital they want. We will substantially lower the cost of health care in this country because we'll stop the greed of the insurance companies.
On this issue, we have to think about how this affects real people. And the reality of how this affects real people is captured in a story that many of us heard, and I will paraphrase. There is, any night in America, a parent who's seeing that their child
Wait, what
has
other
a
channel
temperature
is
that
this
is
on?
out
I
of control, calls
didn't
911,
see
what should I do? And they say, take the child to the emergency room. And so they get in their car, and they drive, and they're sitting in the parking lot outside of the emergency room, looking at those sliding glass doors while they have the hand on the forehead of their child, knowing that if they walk through those sliding glass doors, even though they have insurance, they will be out a $5,000 deductible when they walk through those doors. That's what insurance companies are doing in America.
I'm gonna go get something to drink. I'm gonna be right back.
Candidates, please. I'm one of those parents. I was just in the emergency room, and I'm telling
Congressman, thank you.
We fight health insurance companies every single week. We stand in line and pay expensive prescription drugs. We have to have a health care guarantee. If you're sick, you're seen, and in America, you never go broke because of it.
Okay. A lot of you have been talking tonight about these government health care plans that you've proposed in one form or another. This is a show of hands question, and hold them up for a moment so people can see. Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants. Okay. Let me start with you, Mayor.
I'll go check it out, actually. I'm kind of interested on my phone.
Because our country is healthier when everybody is healthier. And remember, we're talking about something people are given a chance to buy into. In the same way that there are undocumented immigrants in my community who pay.
There's a couple. Is the one with the eagle?
They pay property taxes directly or indirectly. This is not about a handout. This is an insurance program. And we do ourselves no favors by having 11 million undocumented people in our country be unable to access health care. But of course, the real problem is we shouldn't have 11 million undocumented people with no pathway to citizenship. It makes no sense. And the American people agree on what to do. This is the crazy thing. If leadership consists of forming a consensus around a divisive issue, this White House has divided us around a consensus issue. The American people want a pathway to citizenship. They want protections for dreamers. We need to clean up the lawful immigration system, like how my father immigrated to this country. And as part of a compromise, we can do whatever common sense measures are needed at the border. But Washington can't deliver on something the American people want. What does that tell you about the system we're living in? It tells you it needs profound structural reform.
Vice President Biden, I believe you said that your health care plan would not cover undocumented immigrants. Could you explain your position?
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon.
I believe at the show of hands, you did not raise your hand.
Put Buttigieg up to an A now.
Sorry. So you said they would be covered under your plan, which is different than Obamacare.
Yes, but here's the thing.
Can you explain that change?
Yes. You cannot let, as the mayor said, you cannot let people who are sick, no matter where they come from, no matter what their status, go uncovered. You can't do that. It's just going to be taken care of, period. You have to. It's a humane thing to do. But here's the deal. The deal is that he's right about three things. Number one, they, in fact, contribute to the well-being of the country, but they also, for example, they've increased the lifespan of Social Security because they have a job, they're paying a Social Security tax. That's what they're doing. It's increased the lifespan. They would do the same thing in terms of reducing the overall cost of health care by them being able to be treated and not wait till they're in extremis. The other thing is, folks, look, we can deal with these insurance companies. We can deal with the insurance companies by, number one, putting insurance executives in jail for their misleading advertising, what they're doing on opioids, what they're doing paying doctors to prescribe. We could be doing this by making sure everyone who is on Medicare, that the government should be able to negotiate the price for whatever the drug costs are. We can do this by making sure that we're in a position that we, in fact, allow people. Time's up.
I just want to address that point.
Actually, hold off a minute. We need to take a short break here. We got a lot more we need to talk to all of you about, so stick with us. We're just getting started. We'll be back with more from Miami right after this.
Okay. I'm going to lower the volume on this. I'm going to pull up my ranking list. How do you guys feel about this currently? So how I'm using this is C is they don't change much in the polls. B, they improve a bit. D, they go down a bit. A, they go up a lot. So I'll also pull up the current polling on RCP average. So currently Biden 32%, Sanders 16.9%, Warren 12.8%, Harris 7.0%, Buttigieg 6.6%. Okay, so I'll be back on in a minute. So how do you feel about this currently? How I am putting it, I'm not saying I like them, I'm just putting it as in how I feel how they did and how this will change in the polls. How many people are in the stream anyways right now? We actually have 15 people, and our height was 24. That is double yesterday's stream, which is actually super interesting.
Welcome back from Miami. Jose is going to lead off the questioning in this round.
Say current bit rate. So recommended bit rate.
Last month, more than 130,000 migrants were apprehended at the southern border. Many of them are being detained, including small children, in private detention centers in Florida and throughout our country. Most of the candidates on this stage say the conditions at these
So wow, that's actually crazy. That actually no, I could see that why, because of yesterday having lower level candidates, and I was actually surprised getting around 400 views on that. Oh, it's back on.
Immediately on January 20th of 2021, I will first of all, we cannot forget our DACA recipients, and so I'm going to start there. I will immediately, by executive action, reinstate DACA status and DACA protection to those young people. I will further extend protection for deferral of deportation for their parents and for veterans, who we have so many who are undocumented and have served our country and fought for our democracy. I will also immediately put in place a meaningful process for reviewing the cases for asylum. I will release children from cages. I will get rid of the private detention centers. And I will ensure that this microphone that the President of the United States holds in her hand is used in a way that is about reflecting the values of our country. And not about locking children up, separating them from their parents. And I have to just say that we have to think about this issue in terms of real people. A mother who pays a coyote to transport her child through their country of origin, through the entire country of Mexico, facing unknown peril to come here. Why would that mother do that? I will tell you. Because she has decided for that child to remain where they are is worse. But what does Donald Trump do? He says, go back to where you came from. That is not reflective of our America and our values, and it's got to end.
Yeah, she's definitely staying at an A. That caught a lot of people's attention.
Day one at the White House. How do you respond?
With these children?
Let me get to you in just a second.
What's Williamson doing?
Governor, day one, thousands of men, women, and children cross the border asking for asylum for a better life. What do you do? Day one, hour one.
Well, certainly the images we've seen this week just compound the emotional impact that the world is judging us by. If you'd ever told me any time in my life that this country would sanction federal agents to take children from the arms of their parents, put them in cages, actually put them up for adoption. In Colorado, we call that kidnapping. I would have told you. I would have told you it was unbelievable. And the first thing we have to do is recognize the humanitarian crisis on the border for what it is. We make sure that there are the sufficient facilities in place so that women and children are not separated from their families, the children are with their families. We have to make sure that ICE is completely reformed and they begin looking at their job in a humanitarian way where they're addressing the whole needs of the people that they are engaged with along the border. And we'd have to make sure ultimately that we provide not just shelter, but food, clothing, and access to medical care.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes, what Donald Trump has done to these children, and it's not just in Colorado, Governor, you're right, it is kidnapping. It's extremely important for us to realize that. If you forcibly take a child from their parents' arms, you are kidnapping them. And if you take a lot of children and you put them in a detainment center, thus inflicting chronic trauma upon them, that's called child abuse. This is collective child abuse. And when this is crime, both of those things are a crime. And if your government does it, that doesn't make it less of a crime. These are state-sponsored crimes.
Congressman.
And what President Trump has done is not only attack these children, not only demonize these immigrants,
is she not
he is
here?
attacking a basic principle of America's moral core. We open
Okay,
our
Williamson's
hearts to the
not on
stranger.
here, but I'm
This
going
is
to use
extremely important. And it's also important
Tulsi
for all of us
Gabbard
to remember,
as
and I
her
have
because
great
I couldn't
respect
find
for
one
everyone
with
who's
her.
on
I put her
this
at
stage.
a
But we're going
B.
to talk about what to do about health care. Well, where have you been, guys? Because if it's not just a matter of a plan, and I haven't heard anybody on this stage who has talked about American foreign policy in Latin America and how we might have, in the last few decades, contributed to something big more.
Senator Gillibrand, what would you do as president with a reality?
Well, one of the worst things about President Trump that he's done to this country is he's torn apart the moral fabric of who we are. When he started separating children at the border from their parents, the fact that 7 children have died in his custody, the fact that dozens of children have been separated from their parents and they have no plan to reunite them. So I would do a few things. First, I would fight for comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. Second, I would reform how we treat asylum seekers at the border. I would have a community-based treatment center where you're doing it within
Williamson
the communities,
or
where asylum
Gillibrand.
seekers are given lawyers, where there's real immigration judges, not employees of the Attorney General, but appointed for life, and have a community-based system. I would fund border security, but the worst thing President Trump has done is he's diverted the funds away from cross-border terrorism, cross-border human trafficking, drug trafficking, and gun trafficking, and he's given that money to the for-profit prisons. I would not be spending money in for-profit prisons to lock up children and asylum seekers.
We had a very spirited debate
She
on
had
the
a
stage
D
last
right
night on the
now.
topic of decriminalization.
Put her up
of
to
the
a
border.
C.
If you'd be so
No,
kind, raise
I'm
your
gonna
hand
keep
if you
her at a
think
D.
it should be
Actually,
a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we can see them?
was Biden raising his hand?
And let's remember, that's not just a theoretical exercise. That criminalization, that is the basis for family separation. You do away with that, it's no longer possible. Of course, it wouldn't be possible anyway in my presidency because it is dead wrong. We got to talk about one other thing, because the Republican Party likes to cloak itself in the language of religion. Now, our party doesn't talk about that as much, largely for a very good reason, which was we are committed to the separation of church and state, and we stand for people of any religion and people of no religion. But we should call out hypocrisy when we see it. And for a party that associates itself with Christianity, to say that it is okay to suggest that God would smile on the division of families at the hands of federal agents, that God would condone putting children in cages, has lost all claim to ever use religious language again.
Vice President, Mr. Vice President, I don't know if you raised your hand or were just asking.
Yeah, I was a little confused too.
Would you decriminalize crossing the border without documents?
The first thing I would do is unite families. I'd surge immediately billions of dollars worth of help to the region immediately. Look, I talk about foreign policy. I'm the guy that got a bipartisan agreement at the very end of the campaign, at the very end of our term, to spend $740 million to deal with the problem. And that was to go to the root cause of why people are leaving in the first place. It was working. We saw, as you know, a net decrease in the number of children who were coming. The crisis was abated. And along came this president. He said he immediately discontinued that. We all talk about these things. I did it. I did it. 740 million. Now look, second thing we have to do. The law now requires the reuniting of those families. We would reunite those families, period. And if not, we put those children in a circumstance where they were safe until we could find their parents. And lastly, the idea that he's in court with his Justice Department saying children in cages do not need a bed, do not need a blanket, do not need a toothbrush. That is outrageous.
Vice President, the Obama-Biden administration was... The Obama-Biden administration deported more than 3 million Americans.
Yeah, this is true, though.
My question to you is, if an individual is living in the United States of America without documents, and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
No. Depending if they committed a major crime, they should be deported. And the president was left in his... President Obama, I think, did a heck of a job. To compare him to what this guy's doing is absolutely, I find, close to immoral. But the fact is that, look,
the only reason I'm putting Biden not in 8 is because he's already in first place. So there's a lot of room to gain throughout the other candidates.
And those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, keep them safe until they can be heard.
A 15-second, if you could, if you wish to answer. Should someone who is here without documents, and that is his only offense, should that person be deported?
That person should not be the focus of deportation. We should fundamentally change the way we deal with them.
Senator,
I want to suggest that I agree with a lot of what Kamala just said. And that is, on day one, we take out our executive order pen and we rescind every damn thing on this issue that Trump has done. Number two, picking up on the point that Joe made, we got to look at the root causes. And you have a situation where Honduras, among other things, is a failing state, massive corruption. You got gangs who are telling families that if a 10-year-old does not join that gang, that family is going to be killed. What we have got to do on day one is invite the presidents and the leadership of Central America and Mexico together. This is a hemispheric problem that we have got to address.
Congressman Swalwell, what do you do?
What do you guys think? Bernie, A or B?
Without documents, and that is their only offense. Is that person to be deported?
No. That person can be
I would also say back in 2008 with Obama, not a lot of people did know about him, so I could see people like Kamala, Buttigieg, or Warren possibly getting the nomination too.
Families are reunited. This president, though, for immigrants, there's nothing he will not do to separate a family, cage a child, or erase their existence by weaponizing the census. And there is nothing that we cannot do in the courts and that I will not do as president to reverse that and to make sure that families always belong together.
Senator Harris.
Well, thank you. I will say, no, absolutely not. They should not be deported. And I actually, this was one of the very few issues with which I disagreed with
a little shaky on what she's saying. She might go down to a B.
But on the secure communities issue, I was Attorney General of California. I led the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice in a state of 40 million people. And on this issue, I disagreed with my president because the policy was to allow deportation of people who, by ICE's own definition, were non-criminals. So as Attorney General and the Chief Law Officer of the state of California, I issued a directive to the sheriffs of my state that they did not have to comply with detainers and instead should make decisions based on the best interest of public safety of their community. Because what I saw, and I was tracking it every day, I was tracking it and saw that parents, people who had not committed a crime, even by ICE's own definition, were being deported. But I have to add a point here. The problem with this kind of policy, and I know it as a prosecutor, I want a rape victim to be able to run in the middle of the street and wave down a police officer and report the crime against her. I want anybody who has been the victim of any real crime to be able to do that and not be afraid that if they do that, they will be deported because the abuser will
The body language is I feel like Kamala Harris is a good median because between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, so that's why I've been saying in my hypothetical primary elections that she has been winning.
Our intellectual property and party leaders on both sides accuse China of manipulating their currency to keep the cost of goods artificially low. I'll ask this to Senator Bennett to start off with. How would you stand up to China?
I think that, first of all, the biggest threat to our national security right now is Russia, not China.
Yeah,
Second,
definitely.
On China, we've got competition because of what they've done with
Very
our election.
boring.
In China, I think the president's been right to push back on China, but has done it in completely the wrong way. We should mobilize the entire rest of the world who all have a shared interest in pushing back on China's mercantilist trade policies, and I think we can do that. I'd like to answer the other question before this as well.
You have the time?
When I see these kids at the border, I see my mom because I know she
you didn't
sees
answer.
herself because she was separated from her parents for years during the Holocaust in Poland. And for Donald Trump to be doing what he's doing to children and their families at the borders, I say this as somebody who wrote the immigration bill in 2013 that created a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people in this country.
Bernie
that had the
and
most progressive
Trump would be
DREAM
an
Act
interesting
that's ever
race.
been conceived, much less passed. It got 68 votes in the Senate.
I think it'd be very
that had
close.
$46 billion
50-50.
of border security in it. That was
Yeah, this guy's
sophisticated
definitely
21st century
has dropped
border
down to the F. He
security,
is
not a medieval wall.
very
And the president
unenthusiastic.
has turned the border of the
I'm
United
going to change it once
into a symbol of nativist hostility
they finish
that
him
the
talking.
whole world is looking at when what we should be represented by is the Statue of Liberty, which has brought my parents to this country to begin with. We need to make a change.
Mr. Yang, let me bring you in.
I am dropping
You've
him
expressed a lot of
down.
concerns about technology
Where is he
and taking
here?
jobs. Are you worried about
I
China?
would say
And if so,
dear
how
F
would you stand
and
up against it?
Well, I just
chat
wanna
saying an
agree
F.
that I think Russia is our
Well,
greatest geopolitical
Popeye
threat
saying an
because
F
they've
and
been
no one
hacking our
said anything
democracy
else.
Successfully, and they've been laughing their asses off about it for the last
Oh,
couple
shoot.
of years. So we should focus on that before we start worrying about other threats.
Also,
now, China, they do
bit better
pound on
than
intellectual
last
property. It's a
time.
massive problem. But the tariffs and the trade war are just punishing businesses and producers and workers on both sides. I met with a farmer in Iowa who said he spent 6 years building up a buying relationship in China that's now disappeared and gone forever. And the beneficiaries have not been American workers or people in China. It's been Southeast Asia and other producers that have then stepped into the void.
This
so we
is
need
definitely
to crack
part
down
of his
on Chinese,
topic here.
malfeasance in the trade relationship, but the tariffs and the trade
Also
war
messed
are
up
the wrong
on
way
his
to
main,
go.
main topic of universal basic income.
First of all,
So
we've got to
I'm
recognize that
gonna
the China
put him
challenge
C.
really is a serious one. This is not something to dismiss or wave away. And if you look at what China is doing, they're using technology for the perfection of dictatorship. But their fundamental economic model isn't going to change because of some tariffs. I live in the industrial Midwest. Folks who aren't in the shadow of a factory are somewhere near a soy field where I live. And manufacturers, and especially soy farmers, are hurting. Tariffs are taxes. And Americans are going to pay on average $800 more a year because of these tariffs. Meanwhile, China is investing so that they could soon be able to run circles around us in artificial intelligence. And this president is fixated on the China relationship as if all that mattered was the export balance on dishwashers. We got a much bigger issue on our hands. But at a moment when their authoritarian model is being held up as an alternative to ours because ours looks so chaotic compared to theirs right now because of our internal divisions. The biggest thing we've got to do is invest in our own domestic competitiveness. If we disinvest in our own infrastructure, education, we are never going to be able to compete. And if we really want to be an alternative, a democratic alternative,
Buttigieg was actually incorrect on this. The average money was $200 to $250 lost from the tariffs. A little extra money spent.
Much more with our candidates straight ahead.
Okay. Very interesting so far. How do you guys feel about the current ranking? Oh yeah, I should add in another tier for the these candidates. they're not in, so I'm gonna add a row just for them.
All right, let's take a look at the
No.
College in 2020. The place to start, obviously, is where the last election ended, 2016. And remember, of course, by the popular vote, Hillary Clinton had almost 3 million more of those than Donald Trump.
This guy speaks to somebody. Reminds me of
by the Electoral College, and there Donald Trump had the right combination of votes in the right states, enough to win 306 electoral votes for him. So how is that map looking for 2020? Well, first of all, I think one thing you need to do, just understand how narrow that Trump path was.
Yeah, Buttigieg, I think, is in between A and a B, and as well as Sanders is also between A and a B.
Separated Clinton from Trump in Wisconsin.
This is like the same exact thing that they played yesterday, too. I feel like, yeah, same exact clip.
Trump becomes the first in over 3 decades. He gets Wisconsin, the margin in Michigan even closer, barely 10,000 votes. Trump over Clinton, and again, that's the first time since '88 that a Republican carried Michigan. And then there was Pennsylvania here, about 44,000 votes. That's the margin for Trump over Clinton in Pennsylvania. Trump wins all 3 of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, by a combined total of about 75,000 votes. That's it, but that's enough to win the Electoral College. So for Democrats, if they want to reverse the result of 2016, that is the easiest and most direct path, at least on paper.
Oh my gosh, Trump's approval rating is actually pretty good for where he's currently, negative 6.7. I know his favorability has also been like the highest since he's been elected, which is going to be very hard for a Democrat to beat because he beat Hillary with a 10% gap between them.
Florida. We always talk about Florida, right? Remember Florida from back in 2000. Well, here's one. Again, Donald Trump was somewhat of a surprise on election night. I think
personally, I think that Bernie is going to have a very hard time getting the nomination from the superdelegates. So, I feel like Harris will actually, later in the race, get in between those voters that are kind of iffy in between the two of them because she's a good median between them. So I actually feel like Kamala Harris has a possibility of getting the nomination.
So Florida, it's tantalizing on paper for Democrats. It's always tantalizing on paper for Democrats.
Let's look at Trump's favorability. Yeah, negative 7.8. If you look 54 and 41, just started going even better in Trump. So if you look here, 42, 43.5, and then last time it was that high was December 12th, 2016. Yeah, Harris, I actually was, if you check out some of my primary elections, I have her winning, and I think the first 2 that I did, a lot of people got mad about that, but...
Debate from the Arch Center in Miami.
As we continue the questioning, we want to bring in more members of our team.
So let's turn it over to Chuck Todd and Rachel Maddow.
Well, Rachel, I had a dream that we've done this before.
No. This is definitely
didn't happen.
The first time.
Definitely first time. Thank you, Lester, Savannah, and Jose. Let's quickly recap the rules one more time. 20 candidates qualified for this first debate. We've heard from 10 of them from last night. We're hearing from 10 more tonight. Breakdown for each night was selected at random. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer direct questions, 30 seconds for follow-ups, if necessary.
Because of this large field of candidates, not every person will be able to comment on everything, but the less audience reaction there is, the more time they will all get. Over the course of the next hour, we will hear from all of these candidates, but we are going to begin this hour with Mayor Buttigieg. In the last 5 years, civil rights activists in our country have led a national debate over race and the criminal justice system. Your community of South
Okay, I'm back. I had to be right back.
The police force in South Bend is now 6% black in a city that is 26% black. Why has that not improved over your 2 terms as mayor?
Because I couldn't get it done. My community is in anguish right now because of an officer involved.
Pretty good response.
Eric Logan, killed by a white officer. And I'm not allowed to take sides until the investigation comes back. The officer said he was attacked with a knife, but he didn't have his body camera on. It's a mess, and we're hurting.
Yeah, it's been actually doing really good. Around 20 people when
all of the steps that we took, from bias training to de-escalation, but
when the debate's been going.
Of Eric Logan. And when I look into his mother's eyes, I have to face the fact that nothing that I say will bring him back. This is an issue that is facing our community and so many communities around the country. And until we move policing out from the shadow of systemic racism, whatever this particular incident teaches us, we will be left with the bigger problem.
My mic wasn't on for a second.
There's a wall of mistrust put up one racist act at a time, not just from what's happened in the past, but from what's happening around the country in the present. It threatens the well-being of every community. And I am determined to bring about a day when a white person driving a vehicle and a black person driving a vehicle, when they see a police officer approaching, feels the exact same thing, a feeling not of fear, but of safety. I am determined to bring that day about.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I could ask one question, just because I think
somewhat on the bland side, dropping him down to a B.
The question they're asking in South Bend, I think in cities across the country, is why has it taken so long? We had a shooting when I first became mayor 10 years before Ferguson. And the community came together and we created an office of the independent monitor, civilian oversight commission. We diversified the police force in 2 years.
I had a problem saying it too for a while. That was Buttigieg.
I think the real question that America should be asking is why 5 years after Ferguson, every city doesn't have this level of police accountability.
Governor Hickenlooper, thank you.
I've got to respond to that. Look, we've taken so many steps toward police accountability that the FOP just denounced me for too much accountability. We're obviously not there yet. And I accept responsibility for that because I'm in charge.
Policy, you should fire the chief.
So under Indiana law, this will be investigated, and there will be accountability for the officer involved.
But you're the mayor. You should fire the chief if that's the policy and someone died.
All of these issues are extremely important, but they are specific. They are simple.
Is that Marianne Williamson?
The underlying cause has to do with deep, deep, deep realms of racial injustice, both in our criminal justice system and in our economic system. And the Democratic Party should be on the side of reparations for slavery for this very reason. I do not believe that the average American is a racist, but the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in the United States.
Oh yeah, he had Tulsi as Miss Williamson because I didn't have a picture of her if you're new to the stream. Also, subscribe if you're new.
We will give you 30 seconds since we're going to come back to you on this again in just a moment. Go for 30 seconds.
Okay.
I actually feel like that she's
So, on the issue of race, I couldn't agree more.
Sorry.
That this is an issue that is still not
Tell
being
me
talked
when it's
about
good.
truthfully and honestly. There is not a black man I know, be he a relative, a friend, or a coworker, who has not been the subject of some form of profiling or discrimination. Growing up, my sister and I had to deal with the neighbor who told us her parents couldn't play with us because we were black. And I will say also that in this campaign, we've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden.
Or was that Bennett?
I do not believe you are a racist. And I agree with you.
Let me know, was that
when you commit
or
yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California.
Is that good?
Who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So I will tell you that on this subject, it cannot be an intellectual debate among Democrats. We have to take it seriously. We have to act swiftly. As Attorney General of California, I was very proud to put in place a requirement that all my special agents would wear body cameras and keep those cameras on.
Senator Harris, thank you. Vice President Biden, you have been invoked. We are going to give you a chance to respond. Vice President Biden.
I actually think that Kamala has talked the most during this. It's kind of crazy.
Mischaracterization my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true. Number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that. I was a public defender. I didn't become a prosecutor. I came out and I left a good law firm to become a public defender when in fact my city was in flames because of the assassination of Dr. King. Number one. Now, number two, as the Vice President of the United States, I work with a man who, in fact, we worked very hard to see to it we dealt with these issues in a major, major way. The fact is that in terms of busing, the busing, you would have been able to go to school the same exact way because it was a local decision made by your city council. That's fine. That's one of the things I argued for, that we should be breaking down these lines. But so the bottom line here is, look, everything I've done in my career, I ran because of civil rights. I continue to think we have to make fundamental changes in civil rights. And those civil rights, by the way, include not just only African Americans, but the LGBT community.
But Vice President
yeah, I feel like Biden is going to lose
today,
a lot after this in polls.
That you
because
were
he has
wrong
the
to
most.
oppose busing in America then.
No.
Do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well,
I
there
did
was
not
a
oppose
failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Hurt Biden there.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That's why we need to
Biden
pass the
got
Equality Act.
hurt
That's
there.
why we need to pass the
I'm going to actually drop him down to a C.
In history where states fail to preserve the civil rights of all people.
I have supported the ERA from the very beginning when I ran
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds.
Yeah, a lot of people did not side on him there.
From the very beginning.
That did not look good for Biden.
The Voting Rights Act for 25 years. We got to the place where we got 98 out of 98 votes in the United States Senate doing it. I've also argued very strongly that we, in fact, deal with the notion of denying people access to the ballot box. I agree that everybody, once they, in fact, they should. Anyway, my time's up. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Vice President.
All of these things have
Senator
to do.
Senator Sanders, I'm going to go to you on this. You said on the day you launched your campaign that voters should focus on what people stand for, not a candidate's race or age or sexual orientation. Many Democrats are very excited by the diversity of this field on this stage and on last night's stage, and the perspective that diversity brings to this contest and to these issues.
Yeah, I agree.
You're telling Democratic voters that diversity shouldn't matter when they
Biden
make
is
this
not
decision.
doing too good.
No, absolutely not. Unlike the Republican Party, we encourage diversity. We believe in diversity. That's what America is about. But in addition to diversity, in terms of having more women, more people from the LGBT community, we also have to do something else. And that is, we have to ask ourselves a simple question.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, Harris is definitely an A-tier candidate right now.
The worker in the middle
See if
of
he
our
can keep it
economy
up throughout
is
it
making
and
no
the
more
next
money
debate.
than he or she made 45 years ago, and that in the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth. We
The
need
only thing
a
is
party that is
Sanders,
diverse,
you're seeing the
but
same
we
thing
need
from
a party that has
2016.
the guts to stand up to the powerful special interests who have so much power over the economic and political life of this country.
Senator Gillibrand, I want to give you 30 seconds on this.
Well, first of all, where Bernie left off, we've heard a lot of good ideas on this stage tonight and a lot of plans. But the truth is, until you go to the root of the corruption, the money in politics, the fact that Washington is run by the special interests, you are never going to solve any of these problems. I have the most comprehensive approach that experts agree is the most transformative plan to actually take on political political corruption, to get money out of politics through publicly funded elections, to have clean elections. If we do that and get money out of politics, we can guarantee health care as a right, not a privilege. We can deal with institutional racism. We can take on income inequality, and we can take on the corporate corruption that runs Washington.
The first constitutional amendment to do that was introduced by me when I was a young senator.
Thank you, Vice President. We want to shift topics here. Senator Bennett, the next question is for you. On the issue of partisan gridlock, President Obama promised in 2012 that after his reelection, Republicans would want to work with Democrats. Fever would break. That did not happen. Now, Vice President Biden is saying the same thing, that if he is elected in 2020, both parties will want to work together. Should voters believe that somehow if there's a Democratic president in 2021, that gridlock is going to magically disappear?
Gridlock will not magically disappear as long as Mitch McConnell is there, first. Second, that's why it is so important for us to win not just the presidency, to have somebody that can run in all 50 states, but to win the Senate as well. And that's why we have to propose policies that can be supported, like Medicare Act, so that we can build a broad coalition of Americans to overcome broken Washington, D.C. I agree with what Senator Gillibrand was saying. I share a lot of her views. We need to end gerrymandering in Washington. We need to end political gerrymandering in Washington. The court today said they couldn't do anything about it. We need to overturn Citizens United. The court was the one that gave us Citizens United. And the attack on voting rights in Shelby versus Holder is something we need to deal with. All of those things has happened since Vice President Biden was in the Senate. And we face structural problems that we have to overcome with a broad coalition. It's the only way we can do it. We need to root out the corruption in Washington, expand people's right to get to the polls, and I think then we can succeed.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds. It does sound as if you haven't seen what's been happening in the United States Senate over the last 12 years. It didn't happen. Why?
I have seen what happened. Just since we were vice president, we needed 3 votes to pass an $800 billion recovery act that kept us from going into depression. I got 3 votes changed. We needed to be able to keep the government from shutting down and going bankrupt. I got Mitch McConnell to raise taxes $600 billion by raising the top rate. And as recently as after President got elected, I was able to put together a coalition of the Cures Act that billions of dollars go into cancer research, bipartisan. But sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you just have to go out and beat them. I went into 20 states, over 60 candidates, and guess what? We beat them. We won back the Senate.
Thank you.
Chuck,
thank you,
the problem with what the Vice President...
Yeah, 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Sometimes you do have to beat him, but the deal that he talked about with Mitch McConnell was a complete victory for the Tea Party. It extended the Bush tax cuts permanently. The Democratic Party had been running against that for 10 years. We lost that economic argument because that deal extended almost all those Bush tax cuts permanently and put in place the mindless cuts that we still are dealing with today that are called the sequester. That was a great deal for Mitch McConnell. It was a terrible deal for America.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Bennett. Go ahead, 30 seconds.
The reason why the Trump tax cut had to be passed is because they had to pay back their donors. You heard it. They actually said those words. So the corruption in Washington is real, and it is something that makes every one of the plans we've heard about over the last several months impossible. And I have the most comprehensive approach to do it with clean elections, publicly funded elections. So we restore the power of our democracy into the hands of the voters, not into the Koch brothers. We were talking about issues. Imagine, we're in Florida, imagine the Parkland kids having as much power in our democracy as the Koch brothers or the NRA. Imagine their voices carrying farther and wider than anyone else because their voice is needed.
Senator Gillibrand, I'm trying to get everybody in here.
It's the first thing I'm going to do because nothing else is possible, whether it's education or health care or ending institutional racism.
Thank you very much.
Sanders, I'd like to put a different question to you. Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land since 1973. Now that there is a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, several Republican-controlled states have passed laws to severely restrict or even ban abortion. One of those laws could very well make it to the Supreme Court during your presidency, if you're elected president. What is your plan if Roe is struck down in the court while you're president?
Well, my plan is somebody who believes, for a start, that a woman's right to control her own body is a constitutional right, that government and politicians should not infringe on that right, we will do everything we can to defend our Roe versus Wade. Second of all, let me make a promise here. You ask about litmus test. My litmus test is I will never nominate any justice to the Supreme Court unless that justice is 100% clear he or she will defend Roe v. Wade. Third of all, I do not believe in packing the court. We got a terrible 5-4 majority conservative court right now. But I do believe that constitutionally we have the power to rotate judges to other courts. And that brings in new blood into the Supreme Court and a majority, I hope, that will understand that
there should be more rotation.
A woman has the right to control her own body, and that corporations cannot run the United States of America.
I'm going to give you 10 additional seconds, because the question is, what if the court has already overturned Roe, and Roe is gone? All of the things you just described would be to try to preserve Roe. If Roe is gone, what could you do as president to preserve abortion rights?
Well, first of all, let me tell you this. Didn't come up here, but let's face this. Medicare for all guarantees every woman in this country the right to have an abortion if she wants it.
Thank you, Senator.
And can I just address this for a second? And I want to talk directly to America's women and to the men who love them. Women's reproductive rights are under assault by President Trump and the Republican Party. 30 states are trying to overturn Roe v. Wade right now. And it is mind-boggling to me that we are debating this on this stage in 2019 among Democrats, whether women should have access to reproductive rights. I think we have to stop playing defense and start playing offense. But let me tell you one thing about politics, because it goes to the corruption in the deal-making.
Too fast.
When the door is closed and the negotiations are made, there are conversations about women's rights, and compromises have been made on our backs. That's how we got to Hyde. That's how the Hyde Amendment was created, a compromise by leaders of both parties. Then we have the ACA. During the ACA negotiation, I had to fight like heck with other women to make sure that contraception wasn't sold down the river or abortion services. And so what we need to know is, imagine this one question. When we beat President Trump, and Mitch McConnell walks into the Oval Office, God forbid, to do negotiations, who do you want, when that door closes, to be sitting behind that desk to fight for women's rights? I have been the fiercest advocate for women's reproductive freedom for over a decade. And I promise you, as president, when that door closes, I will guarantee women's reproductive freedom no matter what.
Thank you. We're moving to climate. We're moving to climate, guys. Senator Harris, I'm addressing you first on this. You live in a state that has been hit by drought, wildfires, flooding. Climate change is a major concern for voters in your state. It's pretty obvious. Obviously, the state as well. Last night, voters heard many of the candidates weigh in on their proposals. Explain specifically what you're saying.
Actually.
Well, first of all, I don't even call it climate change. It's a climate crisis. It represents an existential threat to us as a species. And the fact that we have a president of the United States who has embraced science fiction over science fact will be to our collective peril. I visited, while the embers were smoldering, the wildfires in California. I spoke with firefighters who were in the midst of fighting a fire while their own homes were burning. And on this issue, it is a critical issue that is about what we must do to confront what is immediate and before us right now. That is why I support a Green New Deal. It is why I believe on day one, and as president, will re-enter us in the Paris Agreement, because we have to take these issues seriously. And frankly, we have a president of the United States. We talked about, you asked before, what is the greatest national security threat to the United States? It's Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I agree, climate change represents an existential threat. He denies the science. You want to talk about North Korea, real threat in terms of nuclear arsenal, but what does he do? He embraces Kim Jong-un, a dictator for the sake of a photo op. Putin, you want to talk about Russia?
Harris, we're going to
he takes the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community when it comes to a threat to our democracy and our elections.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
These are the issues that are before us, Chuck.
I hear you. Thank you, Senator Harris. Mayor Buttigieg, in your climate plan, if you're elected president in your first term, how is this going to help farmers impacted by climate change in the Midwest?
Well, the reality is we need to begin adapting right away, but we also can't skip a beat on preventing climate change from getting even worse. It's why we need aggressive and ambitious measures. It's why we need to do a carbon tax and dividend. But I would propose we do it in a way that is rebated out to the American people in a progressive fashion so that most Americans are made more than whole. This isn't theoretical for us in South Bend either. Parts of California on fire. Right here in Florida, they're talking about sea level rise. Well, in Indiana, I had to activate the Emergency Operations Center of our city twice in less than 2 years. The first time was a 1,000-year flood, and the next time was a 500-year flood. This is not just happening on the Arctic ice caps. This is happening in the middle of the country, and we've got to be dramatically more aggressive moving forward. Now, here's what very few people talk about. First of all, rural America can be part of the solution instead of being told they're part of the problem. With the right kind of soil management and other kind of investments, rural America could be a huge part of how we get this done. And secondly, we've got to look to the leadership of local communities. You know, those networks of mayors and cities from around the world who have come together, not even waiting for our national governments to catch up. We should have a Pittsburgh summit where we bring them together as well as rejoining the Paris.
Thank you, Mayor Buttigieg.
I want to bring Governor Hickenlooper into this for a moment. Governor, you have said that oil and gas companies should be a part of the solution on climate change. Lots of your colleagues on stage tonight have talked about moving away from fossil fuels entirely. Can oil and gas companies be real partners in this fight?
Well, I share the sense of urgency. I'm a scientist, so I recognize that we're within 10 or 12 years of actually, suffering irreversible damage. But guaranteeing everybody a government job is not going to get us there. Socialism, and in that sense, is not the solution. We have to look at what really will make a difference. We have to look at what really will make a difference. In Colorado, we're closing a couple of coal plants, replacing them with wind, solar, and batteries, and the monthly bills go down. We've gone on, we're building a network for electric vehicles. We are working with the oil and gas industry, and we created the first methane regulations in the country. Methane is 25 times worse than CO2. And then we've got to get to that last part. I mean, the industrial, heavy industry, we haven't seen the plans yet. If you look at the real problem, CO2, the worst polluters in CO2 is China, is the United States, and then it's concrete and its exhalation. And beyond that, I think we've got to recognize that only by bringing people together, businesses, nonprofits, and we can't demonize every business. We've got to bring them together to be part of this thing, because ultimately, if we're not able to do that, we will be doomed to failure. We have no way of doing this without bringing everyone together.
Thank you. Vice President Biden, on the issue of how you do this, Democrats are arguing robustly among themselves about what's the best way to tackle climate change. But if we're honest, many Republicans, including the president, are still not sure if they believe it is even a serious problem. So, are there significant ways you can cut carbon emissions if you have to do it with no support from Congress?
The answer is yes. Number one, in our administration, we built the largest wind farm in the world, the largest solar energy facility in the world. We drove down the price, competitive price of both of those renewable sources. I would immediately insist that we, in fact, build 500,000 recharging stations throughout the United States of America, working with governors, mayors, and others, so that we can go to a full electric vehicle future by the year 2020, or by the year 2030. I would make sure that we invested $400 million in new science and technology to be the exporter, not only of the green economy, but economy that can create millions of jobs. But I would immediately join the Paris climate accord. I would up the ante in that accord, which it calls for, because we make up 15% of the problem. 85% of the world makes up the rest. And so we have to have someone who knows how to corral the rest of the world, bring them together, and get something done like we did in our administration.
Senator Sanders, I want to give you 30 seconds to follow up, and I'm going to hold you to 30.
Look, the old ways are no longer relevant. The scientists tell us we have 12 years before there is irreparable damage to this planet. This is a global issue. What the President of the United States should do is not deny the reality of climate change, but tell the rest of the world that instead of spending $1.5 trillion on weapons of destruction, let us get together for the common enemy, and that is to transform the world's energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. The future of the planet rests on us doing that.
Before we go, hang on.
Before we leave this topic.
Here's the solution. Pass the torch. Pass the torch to the generation that's going to feel the effects of climate change. Pass the torch to the generation that's inventive enough.
Thank you both.
Before we leave this topic, here's something you will all want to weigh in on. Hold on a moment. Hold one moment.
Just trust us on this.
Somebody has a younger body doesn't mean you don't have old ideas.
No, we need new
ideas. John Kennedy did not say, I have a plan to get a man to the moon, and so we're going to do it, and I think we can all work together, and maybe we can get a man on the moon. John Kennedy said, by the end of this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. Because John Kennedy was back in the day when politics included the people, and included imagination, and included great dreams, and included great plans. And I have had a career not making the political plans, but I have had a career harnessing the inspiration and the motivation and the excitement of people, masses of people. When we know that when we say we are going to turn from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we're going to have a Green New Deal. We're going to create millions of jobs. We're going to do this within the next 12 years because I'm not interested in just winning the next election. We are interested in our grandchildren.
All right, we're going to sneak in a break in a minute, but before we go, I'm going to go down the line here, and I'm asking you, please, for 1 or 2 words only. All right? Please.
Really?
President Obama in his first year wanted to address both health care and climate. And he could only get one signature issue accomplished. It was obviously health care. He didn't get to do climate change. You may only get one shot in your first issue that you're going to push. You get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed. What is that first issue for your presidency? Eric Swalwell, you're first.
For Parkland, for Orlando, for every community affected by gun violence, ending gun violence.
Senator Bennett.
Climate change and the lack of economic mobility Bernie talks about.
Senator Gillibrand.
Passing a family bill of rights that includes a national paid leave plan, universal pre-K, affordable daycare, and making sure that women and families can thrive in the workplace no matter who they are.
Oh, I like that.
That was pretty good. Senator Harris.
Then. So passing a middle class and working families tax cut,
That's one.
DACA, guns.
Okay. I'm giving you credit for the first thing you said, the tax cut. I got you. Senator Sanders, first thing.
The premise that there's only 1 or 2 issues out there. This
I'm not saying there isn't 1 or 2.
Enormous crises.
Senator Sanders.
We need a political revolution. People have got to stand up and take on the special interest. We can transform this country.
Fine. Vice President Biden, your first issue, Mr. Vice President.
I think you're so underestimating what Barack Obama did. He's the first man to bring together the entire world, 196 nations, to commit to deal with climate change immediately.
And now
I don't buy
participate what they should have.
The first thing I would do is make sure that we defeat Donald Trump.
Okay.
Period.
Mayor Buttigieg, your first priority, your first issue as president that you were going to block and tackle.
We've got to fix our democracy before it's too late. Get that right. Climate, immigration, taxes, and every other issue gets better.
Mr. Yang.
I would pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
Governor Hickenlooper?
I would do a collaborative approach to climate change, and I would pronounce it well before the election to make sure we don't re-elect the worst president in American history.
And Ms. Williamson with the last word.
My first call is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend you are so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
Ms. Williamson,
we are going to have
you guys were close with the short, at least it was shorter response.
Not at all.
All right. C-.
Wasn't even a promise.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with these candidates right after this.
She doesn't even, she's not even answering the questions completely. Yeah, I'm gonna put the volume down. This current ranking. I know, right? Why is she talking about New Zealand? That wasn't even a promise she really made during that.
All right, well, on Election Day 2020, Donald Trump will be something he
This is
was
the same
not
clip
on
from
Election
last,
Day
same exact
2016. That is
clip. If you look at my other
President
live stream,
Donald
you see
Trump,
the
an
same exact
incumbent
thing.
running for re-election. In some
Okay,
ways, a
so
re-election
my top two at
campaign
A,
for president,
Kamala
of course,
Harris,
becomes a
Buttigieg,
referendum on how folks feel the president did during his 4 years in
B
office. So what can we say about how
is
voters
for
have
Bernie
been
Sanders.
reacting so
C,
far to the Trump
I have
presidency?
Yang
What you
and
see here, this is
Biden.
his
D,
average approval rating,
Kristen
meaning you've always
Gillibrand,
got these
and
different polls out there.
Hickenlooper.
One day NBC will have
F,
one,
I
next day
have
CNN will have one. They're always coming in
Bolton,
from all over the place. This trend line is an
Swalwell,
average,
and
a day-to-day
Williamson.
average of all of those polls put together.
What
And
do we
you
have
see here
in the
this
stream
trend
now?
line, it's a very
We have 18.
narrow
Okay.
range that Trump is operating.
Definitely
What I mean
a
by
lot
that is,
better
look
than
at this.
yesterday,
This is his
which
high
was in
watermark, his
between
peak as president. His
5 and
average approval
12.
rating at its best, 46%. And when was this? Early February 2017. That was his honeymoon. He had just become president.
Anyone,
that makes him different right there from
think
every
that this
modern
isn't
predecessor he has, because
with,
all of them
what they
have
feel
gotten to 60,
has happened.
65,
Comment down
70%
below
at
and
least
why.
for a short period. They
I
all
might
had
change my
honeymoons.
answers on
Trump's
some of
honeymoon,
these.
He couldn't even crack 50%. So already we see a lower ceiling for Trump than we've seen with past presidents. But that comes with a flip side, and that is the basement for Trump. Look at this, 37% is the low point he's hit in his average approval rating as president. That is actually not as low as some of his predecessors have gone. We've seen Nixon, Bush Sr., Carter. We saw them fall into the 20s at some point during their term.
Yeah,
That
I feel
has
like
not
Yang
happened to
was
Trump
just
either.
he
37 on the
wasn't
low end,
exciting enough,
46 on
and
the high end.
a
Right
lot
now,
of people I
somewhere
think
in
would be
between.
confused
It's a
about what
very narrow
happened
range
there.
that speaks to
And
polarization. I'll tell you,
if
it
you
speaks to something
understood,
else.
I think
Is this
they would see
presidency
that
really
that
any
would
different
not work.
politically in terms of
Everyone,
how it's
even
being
people
received than the
like
campaign in
Bill
2016?
Gates and
Because compare this trend line, 46, 37, low, high. Compare that to Trump's support
and like
against
all
Hillary Clinton in
different
the polls in the
CEOs
fall of 2016.
of large
Trump's average
corporations
support
also
at a
getting
low
that money
point,
is kind of
36%.
stupid.
At a high point, about 43.5%. Of course, on
Because
election day,
if you
what was the
take,
number he hit?
what is it,
46%,
about
same high
320
watermark
million
he's had
people in the
in his
country,
approval rating. So Trump has been operating
and
in the same range as a candidate.
you multiply
as
that by
president. We say
1,000.
it speaks to polarization. It also speaks to, look, this is somebody who succeeded as a candidate.
That's
in
320
2016,
billion
despite some
a
very,
month.
very high negative numbers. What I mean by that is, look at this, the exit poll on election
And
day.
then if you
Do
times it by,
think Donald Trump is
that's
qualified to be president? Only
$3.8 trillion.
48% said they
That
thought he was
is, if
qualified for the
we
job.
added that, that would
The clear
be
majority said Trump wasn't qualified.
almost a
Does he have
$5
the
trillion
temperament?
deficit we would
35%
have,
said
and
he had the
that's
temperament.
5 times
Do you
larger
like
than
him? Do
it
you have
is
a favorable
currently.
view? Only 40%
And is
did.
that
You're not
also
supposed to be
including
able to agree
tax?
with those numbers. Trump was one of the big reasons his opponent, Hillary Clinton, by election day 2016, almost as unpopular as he was, only 43% favorable.
Biden,
It
I feel, is
created
actually-
that narrow path for Trump, and that becomes the question when you look at that approval rating now in
He hasn't
2020. Can he make his
talked
opponent
about
as
much
unpopular
what he
on election
wants
day
to do.
as Clinton
Just
was
talks
in
about
16?
what he has done, and that's what he's been running on. I think. I don't think that's gonna work out for him. Maybe he'll get the nomination, but it might have something similar to what Hillary Clinton had happen. Is it back on? Oh, okay. I'm gonna put the volume back up.
Welcome back to the Democratic candidates debate in Miami. We're going to continue the questioning now with Lester in the audience.
Yeah, Biden's
We are?
definitely gonna nosedive. I'm
We
gonna be
are,
right
a
back.
second, are going to have a question from Lester in the audience, but that was just a fake out.
Let's go. We're going to go to the issue of guns and.
Congressman Swalwell, among this field of candidates, you have a unique position on gun reform. You're proposing that the government should buy back every assault weapon in America, and it should be mandatory. How do you envision that working, especially in states where gun rights are a strong flashpoint?
Keep your pistols, keep your rifles, keep your shotguns, but we can take the most dangerous weapons from the most dangerous people. We have the NRA on the ropes because of the moms, because of the Brady Group, because of Giffords, because of March for Our Lives. But I'm the only candidate on this stage calling for a ban and buyback of
Yeah, I'm
every
back.
single assault weapon in America. I've seen the plans of the other candidates here. They would all leave 15 million assault weapons in our communities. They wouldn't do a single thing to save a single life in Parkland. I'll approach this issue as a prosecutor, I'll approach it as the only person on this stage who has voted and passed background checks, but also as a parent of a generation who sends our children to school where we look at what they're wearing so we can remember it in case we have to identify them later. A generation who has seen thousands of black children killed in our streets, and a generation who goes to the theater and we actually look where the fire exits are. We don't have to live this way. We must be a country who loves our children more than we love our guns.
Senator Sanders, a Vermont newspaper recently released portions of an interview you gave in 2013 in which you said, quote, "My own view on guns is everything being equal, states should make those decisions."
No.
Has your thinking changed since then? Do you now think there's a federal role to play?
That's a mischaracterization of my thinking.
It's a
Look,
quote of
we have a gun crisis right now. 40,000 people a year are getting killed. In 1988, Rachel, when it wasn't popular, I ran on a platform of banning assault weapons, and in fact lost that race for Congress. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. And I believe that what we need is comprehensive gun legislation that, among other things, provides universal background. We end the gun show loophole. We end the straw man provision. And I believed in 1988, and I believe today.
Why would you
that
leave
assault weapons are weapons from the military, and that they should not be on the streets of America.
Your plan leaves them on the streets. You leave 15 million on the streets.
We banned the sale and distribution, and that's what I believe for many years.
Will you buy them back?
If people want to buy, if the government wants to do that, and people want
you're going to be the government, will you buy them back?
Yes.
Senator Harris, we're going to give you 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think your idea is a great one, Congressman Swalwell, and I will say that there are a lot of great ideas. The problem is Congress has not had the courage to act, which is why when elected President of the United States, I will give the United States Congress 100 days to pull their act together, bring all these good ideas together, and put a bill on my desk for signature. And if they do not, I will take executive action, and I will put in place the most comprehensive background check policy we've had. I will require the ATF to take the licenses of gun dealers who violate the law, and I will ban by executive order the importation of assault weapons. Because I'm going to tell you, as a prosecutor, I have seen more autopsy photographs than I care to tell you. I have hugged more mothers who are the mothers of homicide victims, and I have attended more police officer funerals. It is enough. It is enough. There have been plenty of good ideas from members of the United States Congress. There's been no action. As president, I will take action.
Mayor Buttigieg, I want to bring you in on this, sir. A lot of discussion about assault rifles that are often shorthanded as military-style weapons. You are the only person on this stage tonight with military experience as a veteran of the Afghanistan war. Will military families, does that inform your thinking on this view? Do you believe that military families or America's veterans will, at large, have a different take on this than the other Americans who we've been talking about and who Congressman Swalwell is appealing to with his buyback program?
Yeah, of course, because we trained on some of these kinds of weapons. Look, every part of my life experience informs this. Being the mayor of a city where the worst part of the job is dealing with violence, we lose as many as were lost at Parkland every 2 or 3 years in my city alone. And this is tearing communities apart. If more guns made us safer, we'd be the safest country on earth. It doesn't work that way. And common sense measures like universal background checks can't seem to get delivered by Washington, even when most Republicans, let alone most Americans, agree it's the right thing to do. And as somebody who trained on weapons of war, I can tell you that there are weapons that have absolutely no place in American cities or neighborhoods in peacetime, ever.
Vice President Biden, 30 seconds.
A real 30 seconds?
A real 30 seconds.
Okay. I'm the only person that's beaten the NRA nationally. I'm the guy that got the Brady bill passed, the background checks, number one. Number two, we increased that background check during the Obama-Biden administration. I'm also the only guy that got assault weapons banned, and the number of clips in a gun banned. And so, folks, look,
Was it
and I would
you
buy back
or
those weapons. We already started
Obama,
talking about that.
or was
We
that
tried to get
both
it done.
of
I think it can be done, and it should be demanded that we do it, and that's a good expenditure of money. And lastly, we should have smart guns. No gun should be able to be sold unless your biometric measure could pull that trigger. It's within our right to do that. We can do that. Our enemy is the gun manufacturers, not the NRA. The gun manufacturer.
Vice President,
but the NRA is taking orders from the gun manufacturer.
Lester Holt has our next question. Lester, take it away.
All right, Chuck, this is a question from our viewers. We put some suggestions that asked maybe they could share some. Here's one that came from Kathleen from Canby, Oregon, who writes, many fear the current administration has inflicted irrevocable harm on our governing institutions and norms, and in the process, on our reputation abroad. The question is, what do you see as important early steps in reversing the damage done? And we'll put this one to Senator Bennett.
Thank you very much. What an excellent question. First of all, we have to restore our democracy at home. The rest of the world is looking for us for leadership. We have a president who doesn't believe in the rule of law. He doesn't believe in freedom of the press. He doesn't believe in independent judiciary. He believes in the corruption that he's brought to Washington, D.C., and that is what we have to change, and that's why everybody is up here tonight, and I appreciate the fact that they're up here for that reason. Second, we've got to restore the relationships that he's destroyed with our allies, not just in Europe. He flew to the G20 last night and attacked Japan, Germany, and a third ally of ours without saying anything about North Korea or Russia. And when you've got a situation where you have a president who says something happened in the Straits of Hormuz and the whole world doesn't know whether to believe it or not, that is a huge problem when it comes to the national security of the United States of America.
This is a perfect time.
Need to change that.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. It's a perfect time for me to do another one of these down the line. And this is what this question is, which is you're likely going to have to reset a relationship between America and another country or entity if you become president perhaps because of some relationship that you just mentioned about President Trump. What is the first relationship you like to reset as president? I'm going to go down the line, and I'll start with Ms. Williamson.
Well, one of my first phone calls would be to call the European leaders and say, we're back. Because I totally understand how important it is that the United States be part of the Western Alliance.
I'm trying to get one or two words here. I hear you. Governor Hickenlooper.
You know, I talk about constant engagement, and I think the first country I would go to, and I understand they've been cheating and stealing intellectual property, would be China, because if we're going to deal with public health pandemics, if we're going to deal with all the challenges of the globe, we've got to have relationships with everyone.
Mr. Yang, we're trying to squeeze in a couple more things before we go to another break. Mr. Yang.
China, we need to cooperate with them on climate change, AI, and other issues. North Korea.
Thanks for the quickness.
Who's that answer?
We have no idea which of our most important allies he will have pissed off worse between now and then. What we know is that our relationship with the entire world needs to change. And it starts by modeling American values at home.
Okay, Mr. Vice President, I'm trying to be quick.
We know NATO will fall apart if he's elected 4 more years as the single most consequential alliance in the history of the United States.
Senator Sanders.
It's not one country. I think it is rebuilding trust in the United Nations and understand that we can solve conflicts without war, but with diplomacy.
Senator Harris.
All the members of the NATO alliance.
Senator Gillibrand.
President Trump is hell-bent on starting a war with Iran. My first act will be to engage Iran to stabilize the Middle East and make sure we do not start an unwanted, never-ending war.
Senator Bennett, quickly.
Our European allies and every Latin American country that's willing to have a conversation about how to deal with the refugee crisis.
And Congressman Swalwell.
My first act in foreign policy, we're breaking up with Russia and making up with NATO.
Thank you all. Thank you all. We have one
That's a good plan.
last question for Vice President Biden tonight. You have made your decades of experience in foreign policy a pillar of your campaign. But when the time came to say yes or no on one of the most consequential foreign policy decisions of the last century, you voted for the Iraq War. You have since said you regret that vote. But why should voters trust your judgment when it comes to making a decision about taking the country to war the next time?
Because once Bush abused that power, what happened was we got elected after that. I made sure the president turned to me and said, Joe, get our combat troops out of Iraq. I was responsible for getting 150,000 combat troops out of Iraq, and my son was one of them. I also think we should not have combat troops in Afghanistan. It's long overdue. It should end. And thirdly, I believe that you're not going to find anybody who has pulled together more of alliances to deal with what is the real stateless threat out there. We cannot go it alone in terms of dealing with terrorism. So I'd eliminate the act that allowed us to go into war and not the AUMF, and make sure that it could only be used for what its intent was, and that is to go after terrorists, but never do it alone. That's why we have to repair our alliances. We put together 65 countries to make sure we dealt with ISIS in Iraq and other places. That's what I would do. That's what I have done, and I know how to do it.
Senator Sanders, 30 seconds.
One of the differences that Joe and I have in our record is Joe voted for that war. I helped lead the opposition to that war, which is a total disaster. Second of all, I helped lead the effort for the first time to utilize the War Powers Act to get the United States out of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, which is the most horrific humanitarian disaster on earth. And thirdly, let me be very clear. I will do everything I can to prevent a war with Iran, which would be far worse than disastrous war with Iraq.
Senator Sanders,
All right, guys.
Informed consent of the American people.
Good news is you get more time to talk, but I have to sneak in one more break. We will be right back with more debate.
Okay, lower the volume. All right. This is the current standing on how I feel of what has occurred in the debate. If you have any comments or questions on why I put them there, put it down below.
Well, here it is. This is the month to start
that.
looking at on your calendar. February 2020. That's when all the talk ends and the voting begins. And that massive, gigantic, enormous Democratic presidential field, it gets thinned down, and maybe by the end of that month, we'll even have a pretty good sense who the nominee is going to be. You know, Iowa, always in that leadoff position. The Iowa caucuses, there it is, Monday, February 3rd. The race begins in Iowa, and then traditionally, it is an 8-day stretch from Iowa to New Hampshire.
Let's look at the history of the stream so far.
8 days later, so you can expect
So we cracked over 24 yet. No. But we've been holding, I think, an average of around 18. What is this? Oh, 16 right now. So yeah, I could see why, because intermission.
Relatively new one. Only the last couple cycles. Nevada caucuses in Nevada. That's the next one. And then the big one, obviously, the South Carolina primary, the first in the South primary at the end of the month. And of course, South Carolina, very important because this is the first state where you're going to have a really substantial black population voting. 60%, more than 60%.
This would be really funny if Gravel was here.
Was African American. So a key test there. 4 individual contests. We'll talk only about these states the nights they come in. That's going to be February, but then flip the calendar. From the last day of February, look at this. Go into March. Just a couple days later, Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday, let me give you a sense what that looks like. Massive, enormous. You go from one contest at a time, all in the same. You got California, you got Texas, you got a bunch in the South, you got Massachusetts, Minnesota, all of these states, all at once. So February is going to produce some clarity in terms of who's a contender. Super Tuesday, mega primary. That could give us some real answers.
See what the direction of the country are they saying currently in polling. About a 39-55, so it's not bad. It's not good. And where was it when Trump got elected? April, November. So like at a -31 in his, down about 15. So it looks like people are thinking that the country is moving in a better direction now. Since 2016. Already back.
Swalwell.
We can't be a forward-looking party if we look to the past for our leadership. I'm a congressman, but also a father of a 2-year-old and an infant. When I'm not changing diapers, I'm changing Washington. Most of the time, the diapers smell better. I went to Congress at 31. And I found a Washington that doesn't work for people like you and me. It's made of the rich and the disconnected. I was the first in my family to go to college and have student loan debt. And so I have led the effort to elect the next generation of members of Congress. And we have a moment to seize. This is a can-do generation. This is the generation that will end climate chaos. This is the generation that will solve student loan debt. And this is the generation that will say enough is enough and end gun violence.
I feel like
this generation demands bold solutions. That's why I'm running for president.
Congressman, thank you.
Ms. Williamson, 45 seconds for your closing.
I'm sorry we haven't talked more tonight about how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I have an idea about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to be beaten just by insider politics talk. He's not going to be beaten just by somebody who has plans. He's going to be beaten by somebody who has an idea what this man has done. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and, sir, love will win.
Ms. Williamson, thank you.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you. My mom and her parents came to the United States to rebuild their shattered lives in the only country that they could. 300 years before that, my parents' family came searching religious freedom here. The ability for one generation to do better than the next is now severely at risk in the United States, especially among children living in poverty like the ones I used to work for in the Denver public schools. That's why I'm running for president. I've had 2 tough races in Colorado by bringing people together, not by making empty promises. And I believe we need to build a broad coalition of Americans to beat Donald Trump, end the corruption in Washington, and build a new era of American democracy and American opportunity. This is going to be hard to do, but it's what our parents would have expected. It's what our kids deserve. I hope you'll join me in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Hickenlooper.
I'm a small business owner who brought that same scrappy spirit to make Colorado one of the most progressive states in America. We expanded reproductive health to reduce teenage abortion by 64%. We were the first state to legalize marijuana, and we transformed our justice system in the process. We passed universal background checks in a purple state. We got to near universal health care coverage. We attacked climate change with the toughest methane regulations in the country, and for the last 3 years, we've been the #1 economy in America. You don't need big government to do big things. I know that because I'm the one person up here who's actually done the big progressive things everyone else is talking about. If we turn towards socialism, we run the risk of helping to re-elect the worst president in American history.
Thank you, Governor.
Senator Gillibrand, you have the floor for 45 seconds.
Women in America are on fire. We've marched, we've organized, we've run for office, and we've won. But our rights are under attack like never before by President Trump and the Republicans who want to repeal Roe v. Wade, which is why I went to the front lines in Georgia to fight for them. As president, I will take on the fights that no one else will. I stood up to the Pentagon and repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I've stood up to the banks and voted against the bailout twice. I've stood up to Trump more than any other senator in the U.S. Senate. And I have the most comprehensive approach for getting money out of politics with publicly funded elections to deal with political corruption. Now is not the time to play it safe. Now is not the time to be afraid of firsts. We need a president who will take on the big challenges, even if she stands alone. Join me in fighting for this.
Senator Gillibrand, thank you.
Mr. Yang, you have 45 seconds for your closing.
First, I want to thank everyone who put me on this stage tonight. I am proof that our democracy still works. Democrats and Americans around the country have one question for their nominee, and that is who can beat Donald Trump in 2020? That is the right question. And the right candidate to beat Donald Trump will be solving the problems that got Donald Trump elected and will have a vision of a trickle-up economy that is already drawing thousands of disaffected Trump voters, conservatives, independents, and libertarians, as well as Democrats and progressives. I am that candidate. I can build a much broader coalition to beat Donald Trump. It is not left. It is not right. It is forward. And that is where I'll take the country in 2020.
Mr. Yang, thank you.
Senator Harris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I just want to leave you with a couple of things. One, we need a nominee who has the ability to prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump, and I will do that. Second, This election is about you. This is about your hopes and your dreams and your fears and what wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's why I have what I call a 3 a.m. agenda. That is about everything from what we need to do to deliver health care to how you will be able to pay the bills by the end of the month. And when I think about what our country needs, I promise you I will be a president who leads with a sense of dignity, with honesty, speaking the truth, and giving the American family all that they need to get through the end of the month in a way that allows them to prosper. So I hope to earn your support. Please join us at KamalaHarris.org.
Senator, thank you.
Mayor Buttigieg, 45 seconds.
Nothing about politics is theoretical for me. I've had the experience of writing a letter to my family, putting it in an envelope marked just in case, and leaving it where they would know where to find it in case I didn't come back from Afghanistan. I have the experience of being in a marriage that exists by the grace of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. I have the experience of guiding a community where the per capita income was below $20,000 when I took office into a brighter future. I'm running because the decisions we make in the next 3 or 4 years are going to decide how the next 30 or 40 go. And when I get to the current age of the current president in the year 2055, I want to be able to look back on these years and say my generation delivered climate solutions, racial equality, and an end to endless war. Help me deliver that new generation to Washington before it's too late.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders, 45 seconds to close.
I suspect people all over the country who are watching this debate are saying, these are good people, they have great ideas. But how come nothing really changes? How come for the last 45 years wages have been stagnant for the middle class? How come we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? How come 45 million people still have student debt? How come 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America? And here is the answer. Nothing will change unless we have the guts to take on Wall Street.
Oh, no. No, it froze.
The insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the military-industrial complex, and the fossil fuel industry. If we don't have the guts to take them on, we'll continue to have plans, we'll continue to have talk, and the rich will get richer, and everybody else will be struggling.
Thank you, Senator.
And lastly, we'll hear from Vice President Biden. Sir, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you very much. I'm going to lead this country because I think it's important we restore the soul of this nation. This president has ripped it out. It's the only president in our history who has equated racist and white supremacist with ordinary and decent people. He's the only president who has engaged and embraced dictators and thumbed their nose at our allies. I'm secondly running for president because I think we have to restore the backbone of America, the poor and hardworking middle-class people. You can't do that without replacing them with the dignity they once had. Lastly, we've got to unite the United States of America as much as anybody says we can. If we do, there's not a single thing the American people can't do. This is the United States of America. We can do anything if we're together. So God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Vice President Biden, thank you.
We want to thank our candidates. We've had 2 nights of spirited debate on a range of issues, 20 candidates in all. We want to thank all of the candidates last night.
Seriously, it takes guts to run and stick your neck out like this to you guys and to the 10 last night.
All right, so that was the end of the debate. This is how I end my ranking for if I were to give first, second, and third. First, Kamala Harris, followed by Buttigieg, and then Sanders. Thank you for watching. Please go down, subscribe, like the video, and hit the notification bell for new videos. Bye.